listening to the Booktrospective Podcast, a podcast for all types of books. And even though we read all types of books across all different types of genres, we want to give a disclaimer. Many of our books and a lot of our content sometimes is intended for mature audiences. And we don't believe in censorship, but we do want our listeners to have the opportunity to decide if our episode or podcast is good for them. So with that, let's get into the episode. Hey, it's Dominique.
And Keely.
And you are listening to a Booktrospective. And this week we are doing a very long episode. I am so sorry. We are covering the third, depending on who you ask, book of the Throne of Glass series, Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas. But first, Keely, how was your week?
My week has been a week. It's been okay. Kind of toying with the idea and the potential of staying open physically and moving our location just down the street, or around the corner, a little bit of both. So there's that. I am congested. I have a head cold or something. I
don't. I'm not surprised.
But other than that, it's been all right. What about you?
It's been busy, per usual. I'm getting ready to go on a trip.
And your favorite rocket ship.
That's what I feel like. I've had the craziest customers the last week at my actual job. Yeah, I don't know. Weather's weird. It literally was freezing yesterday. I had my coat on, and it's now in the 60s again. I don't know.
It's nice and cold. This is the weather that I like. The cool jacket weather.
Yeah, but yesterday was cold. It was very freezing.
Cold.
I was in my bones, shiver me timbers.
Yesterday was awful.
I was free. I'm gonna be in the house. We're gonna have to record on Zoom. I'm not cut out for this. Yeah, but same old. Announcements before we get into this. Anything coming up? I don't think so. No. Oh, I will say, shout out to, let me get to my images. So, shout out to Your Name is Positively Pinky on YouTube. You left us 2 comments on our last episode, Daughter of Mine, and we literally cackled.
Loved it.
I loved it so much, and just thank you for commenting and interacting. Even when you don't like the book, at least you liked us, and so that's always
all that matters.
That's all that matters. We're not always gonna read something we like, and that is okay. And at least you didn't have to finish it. We did. So thank you for that. So, and then if you're not already following us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Booktrospective, make sure you're doing that. You can listen to I can't speak, talking's hard. You can listen to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, lots of platforms. It is also on YouTube. So she commented on YouTube. It auto transfer. I don't know how it works. Magic. It's on YouTube under Booktrospective as well. And then we also have our website, which I did update through the end of the year, which is booktrospective.com. So those are all the places to check us out. But yeah, so Heir of Fire, book 3. Keely's got the blurb.
I do. Celaena has survived deadly contests and shattering heartbreak, but at an unspeakable cost. Now she must travel to a new land to confront her darkest truth, a truth about her heritage that could change her life and her future forever. Meanwhile, brutal and monstrous forces are gathering on the horizon, intent on enslaving the world. Will Celaena find her strength to not only fight her inner demons, but to take on the evil that is about to be unleashed?
Dun, dun, dun. Okay, Keely, if you could describe this book in one word. I actually have a word.
I would say... I've been trying to think about this one. What's your word?
Broken.
Broken. I would say... I guess transformation.
That's a good one. Lots of that. So before I do anything, because we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty now, Who's your favorite character so far?
Rowan.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I love a grump.
He is a grump.
I love a grump and kind of their banter and relationship, and just watching it grow. I really like that. I don't know. I love Dorian.
Yes,
for sure.
We love a Dorian.
I don't know.
My favorite character is Abraxas.
Yes.
He sees me.
He's so sassy.
So, I also love Manon though, so there's that. I love so many. I actually like all the characters except for Kale. Every time in this book when she's like something about Kale, I'm like, oh girl, shut the heck up. But okay, so this book, just brief recap. I mean, we're in book 3. There are going to be spoilers for all things are go, spoilers for previous books, technically spoilers for technically maybe spoilers for next books. I mean, I'm not going to spoil for Keeley, but anything can go. And then spoilers technically for any other SJM series as well. So listen at your own risk, even in this like little bit of a recap. So first 2 books, we are introduced to Celaena. She's in this prison camp. She does the King's Champion thing. And at the end of the last book, she drops that her name really is not Celaena. Her name is Aelin Galathynius, the lost missing princess to Terrasen, the heir to the throne. Oh my gosh, our queen. And yeah, we also lost Nehemia in the last book, the Princess of Eelway. And this is, which, as we all know, Keeley has not ever read Harry Potter, but like, this is our Prisoner of Azkaban. This is like, we are getting there. Like, we are in it. And I just love this book so much. So, Heir of Fire is traumatizing. Like, it is what I said, broken. So, Aelin / Celaena, and when I do my breakdown, I will call her Celaena for a bit of time, and then as everyone just generally starts to refer to her as Aelin, I will start referring to her as Aelin. But Celaena is in Winland, where Chaol had her sent, which is like Fae country, and so magic still dwells there. She was really sent there kind of as a protective measure, but she was sent there as a guise of like killing the royal family for the king. But she is like really at the bottom pits of like life. Like, Nehemia has died and she just feels responsible and worthless and just like pathetic, and like she's just and so she meets the worst person possible, who is Rowan, who like could give a crap about anything that she feels. Like, he just could care no less, like, honestly, because she is brought to her Aunt Maeve, who is like her great aunt and is also his aunt as well. He is Prince Rowan, and he's a Fae prince, and basically she's there to talk to Maeve because she wants to find out about the word keys, but in order for Maeve to get her information, she wants to know about Aelin's power. So Aelin has to actually tap into her Fae side that she has not in the last 10 years. So she spends the majority of this book really going through the trauma, the transformation of like rediscovering herself. And the only way to do that is really to work through her trauma, or begin to work through that and come out on the other side, and build a relationship with Rowan, a friendship with him really, and other people. Meanwhile, our friends are still back in Otterland, like doing their thing. We still have Chaol and Dorian, who are really at odds. Dorian is still grasping with the fact that he has magic, and he's not trusting of Chaol because Chaol was dropped this big reveal at the end of the book 2 and doesn't tell Dorian that as a means of protection. And we are introduced to Adian, who is Aelin's cousin, and does not know that she is around at all. And he is like the hash slinging slasher for the king. And so we're introduced to him, and also a new character, Sorsha, who is a heal. She a healer? Yeah, she's a healer. She's a healer as well. And so we have some new characters. We also meet Ren and Myrtle again, who we saw in the last book, who were part of the rebels. And so we still have rebel activity going on. And then we are going to meet more witches, and we are introduced to Manon and the Blackbeaks, along with more of the Yellow Lake clans and the Kraken witches and the blue blood witches as well. So this is where we start to get very SJM, lots of storylines. And so, you know, my brief summaries are not going to be brief, or they're not going to be very summarized here on out. So there's really not a lot more for me to say before getting into this. So if you do not want to be spoiled, I don't know what to tell you. There are probably triggers for this.
There are, and I have those pulled up.
Keely's ready?
Depression, trauma and nightmares, suicidal ideation, alcohol consumption, blood and gore depiction, physical injury, grief and loss, death of a friend, a mother, a father, murder and attempted murder, knife violence, stabbing, torture, home invasion, war themes.
Okay. So lots of triggers. And again, this will be a very long episode probably because I forgot how long this book was. And normally I would start making these 2-parters. I forgot, and I had already built out the calendar. So I'm just going to let it be a long episode. Some people like long episodes. I do. But so sorry. Take your time listening. But we're going to get started. So at this point, we're still referring to her as Celaena. She is in Winland. So she's in Fae country. She's just like lying on this like roof. She's like a stinky, poor drunk. It's just like basking in the sun. She was sent here technically by the king, but like basically by Chaol. And she's not actually going to kill the targets. Who's her cousins, basically, the like royal family. And she's just so depressed. All she can think about is how Nehemia called her a coward before she died. And she's decided that her only plan now is to find and destroy the word keys and free Ilwe. And so the only person that is still around from when the word keys were created is Queen Maeve, her aunt. And she's irritated because she's out of wine. And so she's like, the stupid hawk has been like staring at her. And so she like sticks her tongue out at this bird. And she spots her cousin, who is Prince Gawain Ashriver. And he's technically her target. He's like leaving to go like to battle or something like that. And the like city loves him or whatever. Because she's like trying to figure out how to get into the castle and figure out, you know, where to go from here. But she's like looking at him, and like they have the same Ash River eyes. But she lets him go, obviously, because she's not here to kill him. But she thinks how worthless she is. And like if Nehemia couldn't even stop like the king and all of this, like what is she going to do? She hasn't seen any of the Fae yet since she's been there. And even though she doesn't like Chaol, she still keeps wearing the ring he gave her. And every night she like gambles it away and then like wins it back like for money every single night. So she's like wandering around, and this homeless woman yells at her, and she's like confused. And then she realized, oh, I look disgusting. I probably look like I'm also homeless, and she thinks I'm trying to take her spot. And then she hears this man chuckle like behind her, and it's a Fae male, huge, hulking, silver-haired, tattooed face. And she's actually afraid of this man. And she knows he's here for her and knows he must have been sent by Maeve. She goes to grab the Eye of Elena amulet that she has been wearing the last 2 books, but she forgot that she gave it to Chaol to protect him. And so she can tell that the Fae is like, the man is like scenting her to be sure that like she's Aelin. And he tells her like, let's go. And he just starts walking off, like expecting her to follow. So she's wondering like, what is this man's secondary form? Because all of the Fae have 2 forms, and her secondary form is her human form. So like her animal form is being a human. But she asks, who is he? And he won't give her any information, but his name is Rowan. And she asks like, where are they going? And he says, where you've been summoned. She knows he's probably very old and he's a warrior and probably cares little about her. And we jump over to Chaol. So Chaol is dreaming of Celaena killing Dorian and like taking over the world, basically. And he's eating breakfast with Dorian, and Dorian says, you're thinking about her. He says he's thinking about his father because he hasn't told Dorian this yet, but he had agreed to go back home and take up his title in order for his father's help to get Celaena sent to Winland. This is actually the first time that Chaol and Dorian have talked since he had Celaena sent away, because as far as Dorian knows, he did that like out of spite or whatever. So he also has not really talked to Dorian about like what Celaena really is. And they also haven't talked about the fact that Dorian has magic. Dorian like isn't really being nice to him, but he tells Chaol like, you know, I'm trying here and like, I'm not your enemy. And so that makes Chaol remember when Celaena had told him, like, I'll always be your enemy, and, like, how she was just going to hate him forever. And he's just thinking like Celaena, who was Aelin, which meant that she was his and Dorian's enemy. And he knew like he had shattered her and any hope that she can put herself back together. And Dorian's like, you look sick. Like, what is wrong with you? But as they're talking, Aedion Ashriver walks in. And this is Celaena / Aelin's cousin. He is like this huge like warrior. He's super handsome. He's the king's warrior. Honestly, him and Celaena could be twins. Like, they look so much alike, which is like wild that they think that the king
right
that the king has to put this together. Like, you look at this man all the time, like, are you guys dumb? Okay. But anywho, and so like Chaol's kind of wondering like, why would the king keep Aedion alive all this time? Like, he's obviously like part of like the trade or the people he killed, basically. So the king has summoned Aedion, and Chaol wonders like why Aedion's been summoned here, and he's kind of pissed because, or the king's kind of pissed off because it took Aedion like a month longer to get here, and he also wanted him to bring like Aedion's troop, which he calls the Bane, and he didn't bring them. But he does present the king with like a head and like some limbs, and basically Aedion is known for killing his own people. Like, that is why the king likes him so much, is because like even though he was from Terrasen, he is like a badass warrior who like kills all the people the king wants. Like, he's on the king's side. And Aedion is also wearing one of those black rings that the king wears and that Duke Parrington also wears. And like Chaol and Dorian both cannot stand Aedion because like he's just like super smug, which is just like Celaena. Like, they're very similar. And Chaol notices that Dorian is staring at Aedion like he's putting the pieces together that they kind of look alike. And Aedion is also carrying what's known as the Sword of Orinth, which is a Terrasen heirloom that belonged to Celaena's dad. And so Aedion, so like the difference between Aedion and Celaena is that Aedion is, or Aelin, whatever. Aedion is a Galathinius, Aedion is an Ashriver, and Celaena / Aelin is a Galathinius, which Aelin's full name is Aelin Ashriver Galathinius. So there's that. Like, it's, you know, this book, gosh, you need a family tree when you read it. So basically, Aedion's great-grandmother had been Mab, who was Maeve's sister, and was later named Diana, Lady of the Hunt. And, like, Aedion comes over to Chaol and Dorian, and he can kind of sense it, like, something's off. He's like, oh, is there, like, trouble between you two? He says, let me guess, the king's champion? And he's like, well, I want to meet her. And Chaol says, well, too late, she's moved on. And Aedion says, rumor is a witch king was killed here also, talking about Baba Yellowlegs. And Chaol says, like, why do you care? And Chaol can tell, like, Dorian's magic is kind of, like, kicking up, and he kind of like pulls him to the side and like, hey, like, you know, chill out. And he wonders if Aedion would like stand with Aelin or be against her, because he's obviously working for the king. And Dorian says, like, afterwards, he's like, I didn't need your help. And Chaol says, well, I thought you were going to snap like you did in the passages. Like, are you better now? And Dorian says, some days are better, some days not. And Dorian asks, like, you know, why did you really send her to Windland? But Chaol just says, like, he can't say, and he leaves. And then we meet Manon. So Manon is in this cottage, and she's a witch, and she's been found out to be a witch by 3 men in the village. And so they think that they're creeping up on her. They're like, you know, come out, witch, da-da-da-da. And they're calling her a Kraken witch, which is a type of witch, and she is not. And so she sneaks up behind them and is like, wrong kind of witch. And she kills him. And kills all of them. And so Manon is a Blackbeak. She is the heir to the Blackbeak clan. That is so hard to say. The heir to the Blackbeak clan. Dear God. Oh my gosh. There's so many in that. So essentially, Kraken witches, and we'll get into this later, there are 3 types of witch clans that are like, they're not really like friends, or like they don't stand together, but they're like kind of on one side, and then the Kraken witches are on the other side. And like we'll get the story like later in the series, really. But the Kraken witches, they wear red cloaks, and they get these red cloaks like when they start their periods, basically. And Manon does wear a red cloak, but that's because they hunt down and kill Kraken witches, and when she kills them, she takes their cloak. Manon and these type of witches, actually all the witches, they have iron teeth and iron nails. And she's basically been like wearing the cloak to like hide and kill in the village, or what? Something. I don't So we switch back over to Rowan and Aelin, and they are headed to see Maeve. They stop for the night in the woods, and she is thinking of the little folk. So all throughout this book, Aelin talks about the little folk, and she always sees like their little eyes in the like woods and the grass and stuff, and they're always watching her, but they never do anything. And her great grandmother had also been Mab, and very quickly we switch back over to Dorian, and Dorian has basically been trying to keep a low profile. He doesn't really want anybody paying attention to him, but of course his dad has noticed that he's been trying to keep a low profile, and so he tells him that he wants Dorian to be entertaining Adian. And Dorian just asks him like, why do you tolerate Adian? And his dad says, well, his rage is useful and he keeps his people in line. So he takes Adian like around the castle, and he takes him like out into the garden, and I think Adian trips him, and Dorian just keeps looking at Adian and like at his eyes specifically, and it's like they look so familiar. Like, boy,
right?
How many of these eyes have you been looking at? Like,
right.
Aelin has like, they have like purplish eyes with like gold rims or something like that. Like they're very like distinct eyes. You know, you was staring at Aelin's eyes, like you were like in her eyes.
You were in her bed.
Yeah, like you were like very close. Like
on.
Come on now. And you haven't seen anybody else with those eyes. You know who eyes these are. So Kaol didn't come on the walk with them, and he's kind of glad because he's just like kind of thinking like what kind of relationship can him and Dorian have now, because like now they're keeping secrets from each other. Dorian goes to see a healer because Adian tripped him and he like scratched up his hands. So healers can use magic, but like obviously there's no magic in Adolan, so like they just use natural ways to heal. So he goes to see this healer, and the healer tells him that like she works night duty there. She's been assigned to the castle, and he realizes that this is the same healer that healed him and the rest of his friends the night like in the tunnels or whatever. And this healer's name is Sorsha. And she tells him like that they don't always keep records. He asked like, do you guys keep records of like everything you do? And she's like, no, we don't always keep records. And when he leaves, she can't believe that he didn't recognize her from the night like that they all came or whatever. And she thinks that, so back to Aelin and Rowan, like they're like riding again. They're still trying to get to Maeve, and like everyone's terrified of Rowan like everywhere they go. But like after days and days, they finally make it, and Maeve is there and like immediately calls her Aelin, which she hates because at this point in time she's still referring to herself as Celaena. And she immediately tries to like back out of the room, and Rowan's like, like where are you going? And she says, Aelin Galathinius is dead. And Maeve says, let's not lie. But Aelin just thinks like, well, that girl died 10 years ago on a river. She describes Maeve like as a dream and a nightmare, and how legends have been written about her, and how many people believe that Maeve is actually a myth. And Maeve says, you would look like your mom with the bath. And Aelin says, well, I haven't had the chance to bathe yet. And Maeve refers to Rowan as Prince Rowan, and says that basically he is like her sister's distant son to like her nephew, and that he and Aelin are distant relatives. And so she says, I asked Rowan to bring you here because I've been waiting a long time to meet you. And because I don't leave these lands, I could not see you with my eye. Because she has the ability to, like, see things. And she says, your parents broke the laws by marrying and having you because the bloodlines were too volatile to merge. But Aelin's mom had basically promised Maeve that she would bring Aelin to her to see, but she never did that. And Aelin's thinking to herself like, well, if my mom didn't trust to like bring me to you, like there must have been a good reason. And the thing about Maeve is like she said already, like every fae has two forms. Well, no one's ever seen Maeve's other form. No one knows like what she can be. Maeve like says to Aelin like, I wonder if the rumors about you are true. And she starts to mention Aelin's time as a slave, but like Aelin cuts her off because she does not want Rowan to hear any of like her backstory. And Maeve asks, like, you know, what's happened to, like, your fae abilities? And she's like, well, like everybody else on the continent, I can't use them. And Maeve is like, you're lying. Show me. And she gets into, like, her head, and she can basically feel, like, her claws in her mind, and she, like, fights back. And Maeve says, such a rare gift, the ability to summon and manipulate flame. Such a few exist. And she says, and yet, your mother wanted you to stifle your power. And Aelin says, and where were you 10 years ago? Maeve says, I do not take kindly to being lied to. And Aelin's like, so because they didn't bring me to you, like you didn't help them and let my parents get killed, basically. And Maeve says that I have precious time. And she's like, I know you have questions that no mortal has the right to ask. And she says, I will give you the answers when you come to me. Basically, like, she wants her to train with Rowan and, like, harness her abilities. And, like, whenever he says that she's ready, she'll give her, like, the answers to the questions she has. And Maeve says, like, I do not let half-breeds in my room. So, like, she has to go, like, stay at a place called Mistwood. Like, she can't stay in Dornell, which is where Maeve is. So Mistwood is a place that they send half-breeds. So, basically, if you're not full Fae, they, like, treat you like absolute trash. So, like, Dornell and Winland and, like, all these places are, like, really weird. So, like, the Fae kind of used to, like, rule over this place, and, like, they used to treat the humans really bad. So, like, the humans hate the Fae over here, but then the Fae also hate, like, the, like, demi-Fae or, like, whatever you want to call them. So, like, there's just, like, lots of basically racism going on. So, Aelin basically says, like, you know, she was like, this training could take me months, and Maeve just says, like, well, if you want the answers about the keys, you'll do it, basically. And so before she agrees, she knows, like, she has to clarify. So she's like, you will truthfully answer my questions. And Maeve just smiles and says, you haven't forgotten all of our ways. And she says, yes. And she knows that Maeve was there when the keys were made. So she knows what they look like, and she's actually held them before. And Maeve says, I wish you to become who you were born to be, to become queen. And that's all that Aelin can think about that night, on top of the fact that Rowan gives her a split lip. He, like, punches her dead in her face. And Rowan does not want to do this any more than Aelin wants to do this. And all she can think about is, like, how she doesn't have a crown and she doesn't want a crown. And she's like, I can bring the king down as Celaena. I don't need to be Aelin to, like, take down the king. So she starts picking with Rowan, asking, like, you know, like, why is he going to babysit me? And he calls her Aelin again, which, like, sets her off. She does not want to be referred to as Aelin. And she says, like, no one here can know who I am. Do you understand? And he says, my aunt has given me a harder test, not referring to, and he doesn't refer to Maeve, like, as her aunt also. He's like, my aunt. Like, okay, you can have her. Like, nobody wants Maeve. Nobody's fighting over Maeve. And so Aelin says, Fae like you make me understand the king of Otterland. And he just, like, punches her, like, dead in her, like, face. And then he goes to hit her again, but he stops himself, and she says, do it. And he says, why would I give you the satisfaction of what you want? And he says, if you want to eat stone, go ahead. I'll let you get your next punch. And so she swings and misses, and he just, like, takes her down. And he tells her if she ever says anything like that again, he'll have her chopping wood for a month. And then he tells her that she needs to give over all of her weapons. He tells her she'll be working to, like, maintain the place they're staying at, which is Mistwood, because everyone there works, even princesses. And she says, for an old bastard, you haven't learned a lot of chivalry. And he says, why would I waste manners on a child who is already in love with themselves? And he just tells her, like, be ready at dawn. And he, like, shows her to this room. It's, like, freezing. There's a cot. He's like, there's a chamber pot. I'm not using a chamber pot. I literally would not last. Like, I'm not going to make it. And, like, this is the only thing that's keeping me from, like, becoming a fairy and, like, living in any of these worlds is the chamber pot. Y'all have all this magic and y'all have chamber pots. Like, I just can't believe that. So that night she's, like, laying in bed and she's thinking of the stars and how they said that, like, their ancestors turn into stars so that their people are never alone. And she has not been in Terrasen in 10 years because, like, when she was with Arabin and, like, the Assassin's Keep, she wasn't allowed to go there. And then after she left, like, she just never wanted to go back on her own. And she's just thinking about how everyone just doesn't understand how much that little princess had damned them all 10 years ago. So back over to Manon. Manon is, like, dreaming of flying, but it's actually been 10 years. So the witches do fly in these books, but because of the magic stuff, they haven't been able to fly for the last 10 years. So she's, like, back with her clan now, and Mother Blackbeak, who is actually her grandmother, has summoned her, and her grandmother is talking with these guards, and they're human, but they smell weird. And the whole book is, like, everything just smells wrong. And actually, Duke Parrington is, like, with them for a moment. He has, like, this caravan of people he's taking somewhere. And, like, everybody just stinks, basically. Like, they smell weird. And so because of, like, the whole magic thing, the aging process has changed for the witches. So, like, the witches are immortal. And Manon is actually over 100 years old. But, like, up until 10 years ago, she actually only looked like she was 16. But because of the, like, the no magic, her like aging has kind of sped up. So now she looks like she's in her mid-20s. So her grandmother like also has aged a little bit. So like her grandmother has like some small wrinkles because they're actually like aging like mortals right now. So Manon also has like a troop with her, and they're known as the 13. So like including her, they're the 13, and they're like the elite witch warriors of the Blackbeak clan. And so they've all been like sent out to search like the Kraken witches, and none of them have found any lately. So she actually expected to be punished because like witches are brutal to each other in this world. Like they will break each other's fingers, they get lashed, like all kinds of stuff. And her grandmother has like these really dark black eyes, which is like a trademark of the clan, but Manon does not have those eyes. She actually has really like pretty gold eyes. And her grandmother had actually killed her mother, and that is why Manon is the heir to the clan, because her mom's dead. And so her grandmother tells her that she needs to send 3 of the 13 to assemble some of the other clans at a meeting place. And so what we'll learn is like basically, so the witches are like, what do they call that? Not wanderers. Nomads, yes. They're like nomads. They can't settle in a place because they had basically kind of like won this land, but they had this battle with the Kraken witches. And the Kraken witches, even though they won, the Kraken witches cursed the land. So like the land that they won is cursed and they can't live on it. So like the witches are always like moving around basically. So her grandmother wants them to assemble in some place. And they're basically meeting at a place called the Therian Gap, which is allegedly like a really dangerous place. So Manon's second, her name is Astrid, and she actually is her cousin as well. And then her third is Sorrel. And her grandmother tells them, like, this is when they all report to the witches that Baba Yellowlegs was also killed, and no one knows who's killed her at this time. And her grandmother says that the king wants them to meet, and Manon is like, are you worried that this is a trap? And she's like, maybe like the Blue Bloods are setting us up and they want to take over. But her grandmother says, no, the king has made all of the Iron Teeth an offer. He wants us to ride his wyverns. Now, this is a very important conversation. If you watch Game of Thrones, this is a very important conversation. Because what is 4-legged and what is 2-legged? Dragons have 2 legs.
Dragons have 4.
Dragons have 4. Wyverns have 2. Okay. Cool. I'm going to clarify. Dragons have 4. Wyverns have 2.
So, what's it called? How to Train Your Dragon has it correct.
Okay.
With 4-legged flying beasts.
Okay.
But in cinematic history, I'm not sure that there has been a true dragon.
Okay. They always have 2? Okay. So they all have wyverns.
Yep.
Not dragons. Alas. I just had to mention. Anyways, so Manon's happy to hear this because she like, oh, okay, like I'll be able to fly again. Like, because they have brooms. That's what they were flying on, but they don't work, so they can't fly. So we switch over to Chaol, and he's on his way to his room when he noticed like some of his guards are missing, and he's like, where are my guards? Well, they went to Adian's party. Adian's known for throwing parties. So he punishes the guards that are still there. Like, why didn't you report it? I'm like, Chaol, please lighten up, dude. Like, chill out. This is why nobody likes you. And he goes to Adian's party basically. And he's also annoyed because he's like, what? The Bane's coming. Like, Adian's already bad. Like, then the Bane's going to come make it worse. And he's like, I can't have that. The king's going to start paying more attention. And he might start wondering where I'm going. Because Chaol still, like, goes down into, like, the catacombs and stuff. And he's like, he might start paying more attention to Dorian. So he's like, this is going to make it work. I need to go talk to Adian and have him stop throwing these parties or whatever.
To interrupt you, I was wrong. There have been dragons. I'm pretty sure that, what's it called?
Give me that. Fourth Wing?
Damsel. On Netflix. I believe it was a dragon.
Okay.
4 legs.
I didn't finish watching it, so I don't think I ever got to the actual see the...
My little tidbit there.
I never got to see the demon, the creature, the beastie. Okay. So back with Aelin, she wakes up and like there's like this little tin of salve, and it's a note from Rowan. It says, "You deserve it." And he says Maeve sent wishes for a speedy recovery. And it's like freezing, but she gets dressed and she just like looks at herself and she's like lost so much weight. She looks terrible. She goes down to her kitchen duty and she like introduces herself, and the name she uses is Alintia, which is the name that Nehemia had given her. So in the kitchen, there's an older white male there. His name is Imris, and he's like, oh, hopefully like you catch on quick or whatever. She notices that he's a half-breed because of his ears, and she knows like Rowan was holding back yesterday, even though he like beat the crap out of her, but he was still holding back. There's also a boy in there named Luca. Imris also has like a mate, and his mate is a male. I can't remember his name. It gets in there later. I don't even know if I wrote it down because it's not super important. But most of the people that are staying here are male. So they notice like how hungry she is when she eats, and like she doesn't really talk to them, and she doesn't want to talk about her situation. Luca talks like a lot though, and he's like, you must have either been really bad or really important to have Rowan training you. And so she asked like, you know, isn't that why all of you here? And he's like, well, I mean, yes, but I have years before I'm ready. And she's like, years? Like, I'm not about to be here for years before she answers my questions. And so she asked like Imris, like, how long have you been here? And he was like, well, I came when I was 15. I trained for 10 years. And then they said, you're not going to make it. And he's like, well, I would rather just stay here anyways, because again, in Doranel, like the demi-fae are looked down upon anyways. So he stays. Plus his mate also is here as well. And that's what she thinks about. Oh, right. Like the fae have mates, not husbands. And so she asks like, you know, are all of you half-breeds? And Luca says, it autocorrected. Honestly, first of all, pause. The names that I have in here, one of the hardest thing about taking notes for this book is the typing, because nothing is in here. First of all, I like to text to talk, so I just call Kaol Cole, because I know what I mean. Aelin changes to Ellen almost every time. Adian, I didn't even try to do that. Faye sometimes will work. Rowan is in there. That's fine. Maeve was in there. That one was good. But yeah, like, I'm like, Cole, Dorian's in there. Manon sometime, but like that's also one of the hard parts about taking notes is like none of these freaking names are in here. Anyways, so Luca says like, you know, only the elite call us half breeds. We prefer to be called demi-fae. And like, yes, most of us have mortal mothers, you know, the men go out and do their thing and then leave us to be whatever. And he tells her, you know, like, you look more human than fae, and she's like, I'm not half fae, like I'm a fae. And he asks her, like, can you shift? And she says, can you? And he says, well, no, otherwise I would be considered gifted, and then I would probably be allowed to go to the city, basically. And they tell her, like, you know, no one here really has any magic, and the ones who do have powers, like, they're not really good. And so she asks him about Rowan, and they tell him, like, he's, like, pretty much the only fae that they ever really see. He keeps to himself, and he pretty much never stays the night. And he is one of the 6 of Maeve's like warriors that she keeps. No one knows how old he actually is. And so she asks about his tattoo, and they're like, we don't really know. It's an old language, but Luca said that he heard it was a list of all the people that he's killed. So we switch back over to the witches, and the Blackbeaks are like the last clan to show up to like the meeting. And Manon has not seen the wyverns yet, but they can hear them. And all of the clans never get together because even though these are all the witches who are on the same side, even they don't get along. But there's like 3,000 of them, even though like years ago there used to be tens of thousands of them. She's already had to separate like Astrid from one of the yellow legs, and she had to punish her, even though like she was happy that Astrid was like attacking them. And she had to like punch her like 3 times. And so they go up into the mountains so they can see the wyverns, and that's where they train them and like breed them there. And they gotta get offended because they're like, well, we want you guys to like learn how to like fly on the gentler ones, and they're like, excuse us. But they show them this one called Titus, and he's like a bull. So there's like some of them are like the gentle, like just like the tester ones or whatever, and then like the bulls are like the really aggressive ones. So Titus literally, like, a man like walks in his path or something, and he literally just like eats this man up. So Aelin is going for her first training with Rowan, and she tells him, like, do your worst. And he tells her to wipe that smarmy smile off your face. He says, I don't care about what's going on under the surface. And he says, I've been nastier 10 times longer than you. And he tells her to shift. And she's like, it doesn't work like that. And so he just like punches her, and she dodges like the first two, but then the third time he like hits her in the legs, and she realizes for like the first time in her life that she's actually outmatched. And he literally gets on top of her and is like choking the ever-loving crap out of her. Like, he spares none with her.
None.
He beats the hell out of her, and he's like, shift. And she literally tries to like bribe him with money, like with gold, like, I will pay you to get off of me. And he says, I think you're just used to getting your way, and you have no discipline. You are a child and a coward. And she wants to murder him. And he can tell that she doesn't like that word. And he says, you're a coward who ran for 10 years while your people were killed. And he says, get up. And she can't. She's like, now she's just like losing it. She's all in her head. She's spiraling. And she knows she has a black eye. And so he's like, you know what? Let's go. So he takes her to the place called the Barrows. And there's like these creatures there, like known as the Barrowites. And he tells her, if you can walk through there and survive and face the whites, I'll take you to Maeve right now. And he just leaves her there. So she wants to run because she's like, okay, this is scary. But she's like, I also want to go to Maeve right now. So she like goes in and she sees one of the whites, but then it looks like it's afraid of something. So she's like, okay. And she sees like something that looks like it's supposed to be a man, but it's not. It has black hair and it's beautiful, but it has this black collar on its neck. And then all of a sudden she's like overtaken by this darkness, and she knows it's not mortal, and she tries to run, but she can't see, and she can only hear breathing. And now she's flashing back to the morning where she found her parents dead in bed, and she thought like their blood was like just wetness from the rain. And she's trying to tell herself it's not real, but she can see them. And then she literally throws up and she pees on herself. And now she can see Nehemia dead, and the thing grabs her, and now she's running and she can see Rowan, and she shifts. And then all of a sudden she wakes up and he tells her, you failed. He said, you did make it to the other side of the field, but you did not face the white, so you can't just throw a magical temper tantrum. And she says, that was not a white. And he says whatever that was shouldn't have been there, but he doesn't know what it is because he's never seen it before, and now it's gone. And she says, can we please go back to the fortress? And he says no. And she's like, I am done. And she says, I just saw things that no one should even know about. And he just like grabs her. So back with Chaol, he is meeting with his dad, and his father says, doesn't look like you're really working on coming home. You haven't even found a replacement yet. And he's like, you haven't even told the king yet. And his dad says, like, the last time I talked to the king, he mentioned like some job you're doing, and he was like, oh, I realized that you hadn't told him yet, so I just, covered for you, basically. And Chaol says, well, I'm not gonna leave until I find a replacement. And he's like, so that's why I wanted to meet with you or whatever. And Chaol had gone to another of Adian's parties, but when he got there, Adian wasn't there. And he went to go meet with this courtesan that, Adian was supposed to be hooking up with, basically. And she said that he paid her, but then he just left. And so that's kind of why he's delaying leaving, because he's still trying to talk to Adian before he leaves. He's also been like reading Aelin's books to try to find a way to help her and Dorian. And so his father says, you consider yourself to be a man of honor. What does this say about that? Like, if you don't honor the bargain you made. And his dad says, I wonder why you really sent your woman away. And he asks, like, his father, like, what's the rush? Like, you're going to have me for the rest of my life. And his father hands him this letter, and he knows it's from his mom, like, from the, like, inscription on the front of it. And he hasn't talked to his mom, like, since he left home. But he pretends that he's not interested in it because he knows, like, this is just a trap for, like, his dad to lure him in. And he asks his dad, like, just give me 4 months. And his dad says 2. And so Chaol says 3. And his dad says, I could go to the king right now and have you dismissed. But I prefer that you owe me a favor, so you get 2 months. So he switched to Saoirse, and she is called to Dorian's tower because he has a hurt hand and a split lip. And he asked her, like, where are you from? And she tells him, like, she's from a village that was basically conquered by his dad, and her parents were killed. And he's like, why would you come here? And she's like, where else do I have to go? Like, I don't have an option. And he apologizes, and as she leaves, she thinks, like, he'll probably never ask me to come here again, because that was super awkward. But later, he calls on her again, sending a message asking, for exactly where her home was so he could have it added to his personal map of, like, the continent. We switch over to the witches, and the 3 clans have been, like, divided into shifts so that, like, they're not running into each other and fighting all the time. And tension has been, like, super high because, like, everybody wants one of those bulls like Titus. So fights are like breaking out constantly, especially in the mess hall, because that's pretty much the one time that they're all together. So Manon is like looking at the man that's serving them food, and she thinks about how like basically the witches can drink blood. They don't have to drink blood. She's like, but humans don't have to drink wine, but they do. Like, she's like, it's basically like the same thing. She's a Blackbeak, but like the blue blood witches are like all about like the type of blood. Like, they're like the health nuts of the group. Like, they're very earthy. They're very like into like the stars and the tarot. Like, that's what I like think when I think of like the blue bloods. Like, they're very like crunchy. So the yellow leg heir, her name is Iskra, and she comes up and she like cuts the line, taunting Manon, because she's like, oh, like I heard the 13 were supposed to be flying today, and like legend has it, like you guys were like the best flyers or whatever. I think me and my girls basically might like skip and like watch you guys, like ha 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 ha, let's see how good you really are or whatever. And Manon says, I heard the yellow legs could use some help in the sparring room. And so, like, tension's really high or whatever, and you can tell that they both want to, like, grab their weapons, but they're also both holding, like, lunch trays or whatever, so they don't. So Manon and, like, her group go out to, like, training or whatever, and she mounts, like, a small female wyvern, and she's just, like, kind of, like, hiding her nerves or whatever. And the overseer tells her and, like, the 13 how to prepare for the flight, and her eyes adjust because the witches have, like, this extra eyelid. It's just, like, really cool. It, like, protects their eyes from the wind so they can, like, have their eyes open but see. And they like blink it into place basically. And so before they take flight, she says, we are the 13. From now into the darkness claims us. Let's show them why. I love them. I love Throne of Glass. It has like the best phrases. I love it so much. And so like they start flying and they're all successful. And so later her grandmother like tells her like, I heard you guys did well today. And her grandmother wants her to be the wing leader of all of the clans because they're going to have like a war games. And I was like, I see where Fourth Wing got like a lot of stuff from. I was like, yeah, Fourth Wing pulled a lot from Throne of Glass. I can see
I'm
it.
like, okay, so I mean, wyverns and dragons are like
and like
very similar.
The war games and literally what the war games is. Right. I was like, I see you, Rebecca. Okay. But basically, like her grandmother's like, I expect you guys to win. Like, I do not want a blue blood or yellow legs on that Iron Throne. So back with Aelin, like she's super sore because like shifting hurts basically. So she goes to breakfast the next day and like they're basically like, God dang it, like damn. Like they're like, oh my God. Like today, like when she goes out, like she cannot shift. Like nothing is working. She can't shift. And she's starving, so like afterwards she goes to her room. She's like, I hate everybody. But she's just like, I am starving. So she's like, surely like they left some food out. But when she goes down, like thinking nobody's in there, the kitchen's packed. Like they're hanging out. So she's like, I'm just going to grab some food and leave. But Emrys starts telling a story because Emrys is like, he says he is a story keeper. Like that's his job, basically, whatever. So he's telling a story of like these wicked fairies. He talks about all sorts of terrible things. And Luca says how whatever story he's telling like gives nightmares, and she thinks about how she had heard like this story before or whatever, or no, she thinks about how like if she had heard this story before she probably never would have come here, like whatever it is like really bad. And she thinks about how Rowan like didn't light any fires on their way there and wonders if it was to like not attract things like in the woods on their way there. And she sees a hawk watching, and it looks like the one that had been watching her on the roof, and she knows like this is Rowan. This freaking hawk is Rowan's form. And they ask her to tell stories of her home, calling her Alintia. And she says, like, no, like, I don't remember them. And she goes to bed. But she, like, really doesn't remember the stories from her homeworld. So we go over to Dorian. And he has basically been working on sparring with the guards. And, like, it's just basically to give him something to do. And an excuse to go see Sorsha. What have I been saying? I don't know. It's all the same. Sorsha. I don't know. First of all, I don't know how to spell.
Now you have me.
Sor. I think it's Sorsha.
I
wrote it as
S-O-I, I think. S, maybe.
So, have you ever watched the newer Pretty Women?
Huh?
Have you ever seen?
No.
Okay. Or, I don't know what else she's in. But her name is Saoirse. But it's spelled crazy. But she's Irish. And that's what this made me think of. I don't know. I listened to the audiobooks. I don't know how it's spelled, but I wrote S-O-R, like, so I knew how to pronounce it again. So yeah, I'm going to say Sorsha.
The one that we read with the siren.
Hers was Sorsha too.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, it's more popular. Yeah. I'm going to say Sorsha because that's how, I don't know what made me. I think they were saying Sorsha. I don't know. Now I got my question and pronunciations.
Yeah, I'm confused now.
So Dorian actually really likes her because she reminds him of Celaena, and she asks him about Fleetfoot because Fleetfoot had got attacked like in the last book. And he asks like, do you want the truth about what happened? And he tells her like, we were attacked by these creatures basically. And she asks like, would the king punish you if he knew the truth? And Dorian says yes. And she knows he's protecting Celaena and Chaol, and his magic like just erupts. And so Sorsha gets scolded because her workstation is a mess because basically she covers for Dorian. So she has him like basically everything shattered and the floor got completely covered with ice. So she has him like pretend to like knock everything over and then like pick it up or whatever. And she tells him like, I'm going to help you find a way to control it and I will not tell anyone or whatever. And like the lady that like scolds her too, she's like, you better not be having relations with that prince. Like there's many beautiful ladies in this court and you're not one of them. Blah, blah, blah. Like you suck. Meanwhile, Chaol is following Adian, who Adian is pretending to be drunk so that he can sneak out. And he follows into this building, which he thinks looks like it could be a rebel building. And he follows him in, but he's not paying attention. And the next thing he knows, he has a dagger at his side. And it's Adian with an older man and another guy. And it's Ren and Myrtle, who used to be with Archer Flynn. And Chaol like looks at Adian and he sees the black ring and he tells him, and Adian just says, you're more interesting that maybe Chaol said it. I don't know. One of them says it. I think Adian says, you're more interesting than you let on. Adian says, the day the king presented the sword of Orinth to me, he also gave me this ring. And he said that the ring smelled strange and I knew only a fool would accept it. So I had a duplicate made and I threw the other one into the sea. He said, I always wonder what it actually did. And he asked Chaol like if his friend Celaena is the one who had been telling him all the things that he knows, but he doesn't answer. So Adian just says like, you know how this has to end. Chaol knows like he'll be willing to kill him. So he just says, Aelin is alive. So we switch over to Adian's point of view because he's just thinking how they call him Otterlin Tor, and he misses being just known as a cousin and a protector. And he loved Aelin so much, and he even wanted to swear the blood oath to her. And he had spent years in war camps after, like everything had went down. And he had proven himself to the king so that he would be able to get her father's sword back for her, so that one day he could give it back to Aelin. So they beat up Chaol just to show him like they will. But then they let him tell his story about Aelin / Celaena. And he says to Adian, like, she has your eyes. And Adian just can't believe that Chaol sent her to Winland. But Chaol says, like, well, I didn't know who she was when we made that decision. He just knew what she was. And so Adian asks, like, why would you tell me this when you thought I was working for the king? And Chaol says, well, I didn't see the change in you like I did with the others with the ring. Plus, the Bane still hasn't come here, even though the king has been, like, demanding that they come. And you keep having these parties and not going to it. So I knew something was up. So Adian asked him, like, does Dorian know? And he says no. Adian just thinks, like, Maeve never cared about Adian because he's a demi-fae. Like, he's only half fae versus Aelin, who is a full fae. And so Chaol asks, like, for them to make a bargain. So back with Aelin, like, over the next week, she just keeps working in the kitchen and training. And Luca's the only one who really, like, talks to her, even though, like, she's still pretty, like, secluded and just to herself. And she still can't shift, so Rowan is just like pushing her. And on the 8th day, she says, you shift. And he says, just once. And like, he literally doesn't even like do anything. He just like switches like very quickly into a hawk.
Like a blink of an eye.
Yeah. And it's incredible. And she asks the most important question, which is, where do your clothes go? Because they're back on. And he goes, I don't know. The in between, like, I don't care. No, very important, because in every movie, when somebody shapeshifts into like a werewolf or whatever, it's like, do you wake up naked or do you have your clothes on? Right. Like, what is are they stretchy like the Hulk? Like, what is it? So Aylin's asking the important questions. So, like, she is, like, sassing or whatever, and he literally, like, so Rowan's power is wind, but it's not just wind. Like, he has, like, a cool power, too. So she's, like, sassing, and he literally, like, chokes the air out of her, and then, like, grabs her tongue when she's talking. So then she bites him, so then he bites her. So she shifts, and all she can think about is how she wants to rip his throat out. And he says, there you are. And I was like, Resand, is that you? Is that you? So all she can think, like, she shifts, and so she's like, oh my gosh, like, it smells divine. And she realizes, oh my God, I shifted and I'm healing. And then she shifts back, and Rowan asks, like, does your lover know what you are? And she says, like, he knows everything, which isn't true. And Rowan says, well, I won't be doing that again. Like, you don't bite other males' women. And she says, we're not together. I broke it off before I came here. And he says, why? And she says, well, because he's as repulsed by me as you are. And he says, it's better that way. The people that you love are just weapons to be used against you. And he tells her to shift again, but she's, like, panicking, feeling like she's forgetting what Nehemia looks like, because she starts thinking about Nehemia, and she's like, oh my God, Nehemia, what does Nehemia look like? I can't picture her. And she says, why don't you just bite me again? And he says, why don't I just give you the lashing you deserve? And she says, if you ever whip me, I will skin you alive. And he's like, I'm going to give you double kitchen duty. And she's like, this bargain with Maeve was, like, foolish. And he just says, you're worthless. You probably would have done the world more good if you would have died 10 years ago. Rowan, oh my God. Like, no hold bars. Like, oh goodness. She tells him, like, I'm done with this. And when she leaves, he follows her saying, like, is that what you do? You just run away? And says, like, I bet you never had to fight for anything. And he says, like, I don't know what you want from Maeve. And she says, you don't know what I want. How about saving the world from the king? And he says, why bother? And she says, I made a promise, an unbreakable vow. He says, what about your people? And she says, they're better off without me. And he says, why can't your friend take care of her own kingdom? And she says, because she's dead. And I'm stuck with my worthless life. And she walked away. So she's spending the night in the woods, and she has to find wood to make a fire, and she laughs because her magic is fire and she can't use it. So she knows, like, she's like, tomorrow I'm just going to have a new plan. I'm going to do something different. Like, it'll all be good. And she falls asleep, and she can, like, see the little folk in their eyes, and she feels good. But then it gets quiet. Too quiet. And then there's a smell, and she thinks, I'm an idiot. I made a fire. You don't make a fire. So she gets up quickly, and she sneaks, like, out of this cave she was in and, like, down the hill. And she looks up to where her cave was, and then she's like, yeah, it looks like a freaking beacon. And then she sees 3, like, silhouettes that look like humans outside of her cave. I'm like, dear God, absolutely not. They're skinwalkers. Yeah. And then, like, lightning flashes, and they're gone. But she can smell them near her. And she, like, runs, but she slams directly into Rowan. So he was never, like, too far away. And he tells her, you're going to listen to everything I say, or else you're going to die tonight. He says, shift into your mortal. He's like, shift, your mortal slowness will kill you. And she literally can hear them, like, sharpening their talons. And he says, walkers do not need air. So, like, his power can't help them. Because, like, he can, like, choke the air out of your lungs. But, like, they don't breathe. So he can't. So she shifts, and, like, she's like, oh my God. Like, they smell even worse. And she can hear them talking, and they're like, one of them's like, I want him. And the other one's like, well, I want her. And they want to peel their skin off. And he tells her to run to the river, and they just start chasing them. So they're closing in on them. And she knows, like, Rowan said that no mortal weapon can kill them. But he did not say immortal. So she tells him to shift into his hawk form as they run. And so as they reach the river, like, they jump. And he shifts into hawk form. And she bursts into a blue flame. And she just incinerates them. And after that, she asks him, like, you know, why is shifting so important? And he says, so you can control it. You could easily hurt yourself with that power. And he says, what does it feel like? And she says, oh, well. And he says, have you ever felt the bottom of it? And she says she hasn't. And he tells her, like, for those with stronger powers, it can take longer. It takes me, like, a full day to fully empty out my power. And it can take days or weeks to recover. And you can actually burn out your mind altogether. And they also talk about iron. So, like, in this world, iron fights the magic. And he tells her that like one time he was captured and he was like cut open, and he starts telling her like about all of it. And she's like, oh, I know, like whatever. And she starts thinking about Sam, and he's like, was it done to you? And she just says, no, I was too late. He didn't survive. And she thanks him for saving her, and he says, I'm bound to my queen, but I wouldn't leave anyone to skinwalkers. And she says, a warning would have been nice. And he says, I warned you weeks ago, but even if I would have warned you today, you wouldn't have listened. And she knows he's right. So he asks her, like, what is your shifting trigger? And she says, fear and necessity. And he says, you didn't lose control. Your clothes didn't burn, and your daggers didn't melt, and your hair didn't incinerate. And she says, I didn't want you to die. And he says, you're not leaving. And she says, why? And he says, because I said so. And he gives her his cloak. And we switch over to Manon. And Manon's thinking, like, I'm claiming Titus. But like all of the witches are down here, like viewing all the wyverns, and they're all pretty much drawn to Titus. And Astrid claims, this is like claiming day. So Astrid claims one for her. And Petra, who is the Blue Bloods heir, like she comes up to Manon and she says, like, she basically can tell like she wants Titus. And Manon knows like she's going to have to fight Iskra for Titus. So Iskra shoves Manon into the pit with Titus and another beast, which Titus, we know, ate a person the other day. So the small beast starts trying to protect Manon, even though like Titus is like kind of like looking at him, giving the signal like this one's mine, back down or whatever. So she runs, and the other beast literally attacks Titus to protect her. So she turns around, and instead of saving herself, she also attacks Titus, and her and the beast like kill it. They kill Titus. So she looks and she claims this little beast, and she names him Abraxos. And her grandmother is pissed.
So angry.
She's like, this is a bait beast. This is an idiot animal. This is not meant to be like the leader of the clan's wyvern. Like, whatever, you moron. And Astrid gets whipped for letting her fall into the pit, because she doesn't tell them that like Iskra pushed her into the pit, because she doesn't feel like dealing with all that. So like Abraxos was meant to be a baby. So like his like wings were clipped, like his tail was mutilated. They took the thorns. He was like meant to be bait for the other ones. Like he's not supposed to be defensive at all. So she goes to visit him, and like she wants to start training immediately, but the trainer says like, well, you can't, because like he's never been trained. It might take weeks or months before he can even fly. And she asks like, well, can they understand me? And he says no, but she thinks like he can. Like he looks like he's like they have like a connection. So we go back to Chaol, and he goes down to the tomb with Adian, and they're down there talking. Meanwhile, Dorian approaches, and he is outside eavesdropping because he had found the door left open in Aelin's old room. And so he hears Chaol telling Adian about the necklace and Aelin and the king. So like after like all of that, Dorian waits, and like he confronts Chaol afterwards, and Chaol basically says like, look, I didn't tell you because I didn't know if you would go to your dad about it. And Dorian, like, his power starts to surge, and he basically asks Chaol like, how long have you known about all of this? And Chaol says like right before she left. And then he asks like, are you guys going to kill my father? And Adian says like, doesn't he deserve to die, basically? And Dorian asks Chaol like, did you tell him about me? And Adian says no, but if you don't control yourself, everyone will know. And Chaol says like, you know, you can trust Adian. And Dorian says he wants to be Aelin's king. And Adian says she would marry me before marrying a prince of Otterlin. And Dorian says, I will carry your secrets to the grave, but I want no part of this. And he just leaves. And Adian wasn't surprised to learn about like the rings, and he figures that Baba Yellowlegs was there like having something to do with like the rings and like all that stuff that's going on too. So he like reports back to Ren and Murtaugh because they want to know like all the info about Aelin, but he doesn't tell them everything just yet. But they do talk about like trying to assemble her court, which is basically all of the remaining members from Terrasen, and like they're talking about like who they think will join. They talk about the Lady of Peranth. So there was the Lord of Peranth and Lady of Peranth who had a daughter whose name was Alid, and like they were killed, and like there's a few other families. And Murtaugh just basically says, like, many of them are probably going to need convincing of whose side you were on, like, because it's been 10 years, and, like, Aelin's been missing this whole time, and you've been fighting for the king this whole time. Like, they're probably going to need a lot of convincing. So back with Aelin, it's been like another week and she still cannot master her shifting. But she no longer hates Rowan. She just like strongly dislikes him. And they've been practicing like in this old temple that used to belong to Mala, the sun guide, which she realizes is because Rowan hopes like that would inspire like her fire abilities and help her shift. So she asks Rowan like how old he is, and he says like, he never really tells her, but she tells him like how different he is from the Fae on her continent, because like basically like the Fae on her continent kind of were like weak. Like the king was able to come in and take them out so easily, and like Rowan is so strong. He kind of tells her like, yeah, like basically like not he doesn't call them weak. He was like they were just like gentler basically on her continent. So like in the fortress, like she started like, you know, being friendly and smiling at people, and every time she does, people are like shocked, and Rowan is like, well, it's your scent. And she's like, my scent? And he's like, well, your scent basically says you don't want to be approached. And I said, this is the one time I think I do want to be in this world. And normally I'm like, I don't like the whole scenting thing, but like, I wish I could like give that off. Like, stay away.
Give off. Back off.
Back off. Yeah, like, do I look like I want to be talked to right now? Like, yes, stay away. So she says, like, you know, well, that's good because I'm not really interested in males right now. And he says, well, what happens if you become queen? Are you not going to marry, like, for conquest? And that thought makes her feel, like, disgusted. Like, she's like, I don't want a man. Good. So he tells her, like, they're going to go to investigate something because there is a woman's body that has been weirdly murdered. Like, it's like the life was drained out of it. And she's like, what did this? And he tells her, you tell me. And it smells like the chamber from Otterland. And she's like, she had smelled this smell when her parents died too. And Rowan tells her this is the fourth body in a few weeks, and none of them have been reported as like missing or dead. And she thinks like this is the same creature from the Barrow-wights. But before they leave, she's like, we have to bury her. We can't leave her. So they burn her body like in the old way. So back with Chaol, like he has not talked to Dorian or Adian like since that encounter. So he goes to meet with Adian in Aelin's hidden apartment. So before she left, she had told him about the apartment she had where she used to stay like with Sam. And he wonders like why Aelin never killed Arabin for like what he did to Sam, and also like he knows that Arabin must know who she really is. So he's like kind of thinking like Chaol's kind of thinking like Aelin's probably going to be able to use magic like on the battlefield. Or no, so Chaol and Adian are kind of talking about like fighting or whatever. And Chaol's like, you know, Aelin will be able to use her like that magic, like it's amazing or whatever. But Adian's like, I don't want her on a battlefield. And Chaol's like, you obviously don't know Aelin. Like, good luck with that one. But he tells Chaol like, they're kind of talking like how like things happened when the magic disappeared, and like how the animals were being weird, and like how like there was basically like 3 waves of magic disappearing. And then like how there was like all these like orders to like kill like all the magic wielders after like the magic disappeared as well. And Adian just really wants to know like why is Chaol helping his enemies now basically. And he says like, well, I mean, I just basically learned everything was a lie. And he says like, I believed my king. Like, he's like, I get it. Like, I know I saw the slaves and I know, but like, I believed my king. I believe what he said to be true and like the right thing to do or whatever. So Dorian, meanwhile, like pretty much now every day he meets up with Sorsha, and they are like meeting for 1 hour in this like workroom doing some kind of research on his powers. And she tells him like, you know, we can use iron to subdue like your powers. So they try by adding like this powder to like his like a drink or whatever, and like at first it doesn't do anything, but then it works and he kisses her, and she's like, oh like, oh god. So we jump over to Manon, and Manon tells Astrid that she's gonna go to train with Abraxos. And basically like after Astrid got like whipped or whatever for like her falling, for Manon being pushed in the pit, she's like not allowed to leave Manon's side. But Manon's like, I need to go do this by myself. And she's like, you're either gonna have to be like my grandmother's spy or my second. And Astrid says like, I serve you. Like, I'm good. Whatever. So she goes to train with Abraxos, and she tells Abraxos like, I am Manon. I'm your owner. You know, you're Abraxos. You are the thing. And he looks at her as if like, you know, he's understanding. And she tells him like, you know, I'm going to put this saddle on you, and I'm going to give you new spikes, and they're going to be like my fingernails. and I'm going to give you fangs like my fangs, and then we're going to fly, and then we're going to get out of here. And so, like, while she's working on that, Astrid's, like, overseeing the training for the war games because they're still getting ready for that. And also, Astrid and some of the other girls witches have been, like, sneaking out and, like, tasting on the men at night. There's also, like, these two, so part of the 13, there's lots of them. So there's Astrid and Sorrel. There's these demon twins who are Etta and Briar. And I had to put a pin in that. So, SJM notoriously does not repeat names. But Briar is a repeat name. In Akawar, when they go and they rescue Elaine from the camp, from King Hybern's camp, they also rescue a human girl. Her name is Briar. Just put a pin in that. Okay. Anyways, so back with Aelin. So, Rowan is now, like, taking Aelin to, like, just visit the healers because she's always wanted to see that. She actually always wanted to be a healer, but her mom would never take her because they train, like, near Maeve, and she didn't want her to be anywhere near Maeve. But then he takes her to see, like, another body, and he admits, like, I need your help. So, basically, this body is near a bunch of humans, and obviously they're terrified of Rowan, and they also hate the Fae. So, like, Aelin's thinking about the body, and it just makes her angry because, you know, what's going on here. So that makes her shift, and then she realizes, like, that's why Rowan told her about the body, because he knew, like, anger would make her shift. And he's like, use it as a blade. Like, it's not your enemy. But she just kind of thinks, like, Erebin made me hate everything about my heritage. Like, you know, that's why she feels the way that she does. But he wants her to shift because, like, they're going to run to where they go. But obviously, if she's human, like, she would have never made it because they run 20 miles. I can't run a mile. So there's that. So she's thinking, like, if she could run that, like, she's like, I wish I could have run this fast to get to Nehemia. But then she's like, honestly, it wouldn't have mattered. Nehemia set up her own death anyways. And it wouldn't have made a difference because she killed herself because I was refusing to help. So, like, all of this is stupid. And so then, you know, after they get there, like, he's like, you need to change your clothes or whatever. And he shows his scarred back, but, like, she doesn't want to show her back. And so, like, they're going around the town, they're asking questions, and, like, everyone's like, nope, out. They don't want to talk to them. They don't want to offer them any information. The innkeeper's like, nope, we're all booked. All these things. So no one wants to answer anything. And so then she smells chocolate. Chocolates? What are they selling?
Favorites.
Chocolates? What are they selling? Chocolates?
I remember when they invented chocolate.
So she's like, did you bring money? And she's like, I'm not going to let them not deal with me or whatever. So she goes and she starts, like, buying up all this chocolate and stuff. So, like, when the shop owners hear that, like, they're spending money, then everybody starts, like, reopening their shops for the day. And so now everybody's, like, talking. Like, even the innkeeper's like, oh, you want the, like, best sweet in the town? But, like, then they're like, you know, we don't want to get robbed or anything. So they're like, we're good or whatever. So, like, they're leaving, and, like, she's just thinking about how her mother used to call her Fireheart. And, like, they like, set up for the night, and she starts dreaming of like a night that she had as a kid. So she one day got banned from the library because she caught some books on fire. And, like, literally, basically when she was a kid, everyone used to be scared of her but Adian because they thought she was dangerous. And her dad and her mom were, like, arguing because her dad was like, you know, she needs to go. Her mom's name is Evelyn, and he was like, Evelyn, she needs to go training. Like, she can't control it. But her mom was just so scared to send her anywhere because she didn't want Maeve to get to her. And he's like, you know, Elid's going to a school, and her mom says, like, you know, we don't know what Otterlin's planning. And, like, Adian was, like, hiding in her room and was like, because her dad was like, Adian's her only friend, and he's like, so what if I'm your only friend? Like, I'm the only one that matters or whatever. And, like, her dad ends up coming in her room, and she tells her dad, like, you know, basically, like, she doesn't want to be, like, queen one day or whatever. And, like, her dad was not king, but her dad was, like, next in line to be king. So, like, that why she was next in line to be queen or whatever. And, like, her dad never really wanted to be king either or whatever. But her dad said, you know, we could talk about it in the morning, which that morning never came. Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So back over to Sorsha. She's like, the kiss meant nothing. That was nothing. And so she starts taking Dorian the iron, but she's, like, pretending it's, like, a contraceptive tonic because that would be appropriate for him. Uh-huh. And he asked her, like, you know, why are you helping me? And he's like, I just want to thank you for like seeing me and like not running from me. And she knows this is bad. And so like she runs out. She's like, this is the prince. I can't do this. But he follows her and she just like grabs him and she kisses him. So it's all down here from here, folks. And meanwhile, Kale is meeting with Adian on his next night off, and he's mad because like he's like, this is taking entirely too long. And Adian is like, what is the rush, dude? And he's like, I'm going home. And Adian is like, oh, like that kind of sucks because like your dad sucks. And Adian never knew who his dad was. He's like, well, I never knew who my dad was, but at least he's not your dad. And then like all of a sudden Rin like busts into the apartment and he busts in and he's like bleeding. And like, he's like, me and Myrtle were followed, but Myrtle got away. But like, there's still 6 guys following me. So Adian literally murders them all. And they take Rin to like the home of like this madam. And like, she's like fixing Rin up, but she tells Cole, like, you need to play the part. She tells Kale he needs to play the part. So she like musses his hair and puts some rouge on his lips and stuff like that. And like so they're like guards, but Kale doesn't recognize any of these guards, but they bust in and he like comes out. He's like, oh, is that the wine? Like pretending he's drunk or whatever. And they leave and like they get Rin all stitched up because he was like stabbed in the stomach. And they give him like some tonics and stuff. And they get him all stitched up. So while they're there, Myrtle like does show up and he explains how magic disappeared in like a triangle on the map. So, Kale offers them like Aylin's apartment to stay in because basically him and Rin are home. So over with Manon, she is trying to feed Abraxos and he refuses to eat the meat, like Healy. And she says like, fine. Like cause she's like, you have to eat. Like you need to be strong. You need to eat. She's like, well, fine. If you won't eat it, I will. And so she takes a bite of it and she spits it out and she's like, it tastes like the people smell here. Like it's disgusting. So she hunts a goat for him because her grandma summons her and is like, you smell like poop and blood. And she's like, that's because I'm literally covered in it because she had to get a goat and as she was killing it, it pooped on her. And yeah. So there's that. And meanwhile, like while she does that, Abraxos literally just like lounges in the flowers and like eats. Like he's such a queen. And so basically her grandma says like, her grandma's also pissed off. Her grandma's always pissed off. And she's like, I hear you're not flying yet. And she's like, if you're not flying by tomorrow, do not come back. So the next day she tells Abraxos, she says, I hate you. And he's like huffing, like he's not going to fly. And she tells him, I will skin you. And I'm literally, she's like, because she's like, I'll wear you like a hide or something like that. And I'm like literally cackling. And he's like lying in the sun like a cat, like bathing. And she like, so she just like runs and mounts him and like forces him off. And he's like bucking and she's like just guiding him and he's panicking. And she's like, Abraxos, like stop, like we're going to fall off the cliff. Well, they fall off the cliff. Yep. But he opens his wings and he saves them. So thank God they don't die. So her and the 13 start practicing like flying. And so they're practicing in the morning in secret. And we go back over to Aelin. So there's been no more bodies for like the next week. So now her task has been to light a single candle, which is impossible. And one night she asked Emrys to start telling stories about Maeve. So he tells the story about Maeve, Mora, and Mab. And they are like the 3 sisters. They all ruled before men. And Mora and Mab had fallen in love with mortal men, so they gave up their immortality. And as she's like listening to the story, this massive mountain cat just starts strolling up to the place, and she's like, y'all don't see that? No, because nobody's moving. But then it shifts into a man, and this man is Gabriel, but he runs in, and he like runs to Rowan, and he's basically like, I was looking for you and I asked Lorcan and the twins and I figured you were here. And he and Rowan go into Rowan's room and like they don't come out for a while. So later, like she's like, okay, like I'm going to take them some food. So she goes in there and opens the door and Rowan's like, what? And she sees Gabriel like half naked on the table and Rowan is tattooing him and he just tells her to get out. So she leaves the food and like, she's like, like sorry, whatever. And he follows her out and she's like, do you do that for money or whatever? And he's like, I would never stoop that low. And he starts to insult her and she's like, can you just like slap me or something? Like, I'm so tired of being told how worthless I am. And he's like, she tells him like, you left me. And she's like, I have no one. And he says, you are nothing to me. I do not care about you. I have nothing to give you. Like, I have nothing for you. Like, Rowan, sir, you don't have to cut so deep. So she's hurt because like she's like, I just felt like I finally had someone that like kind of got me.
Right.
And she's like, I don't have anybody. Like I don't have one single person that gets me. So the next morning, then she comes down the next morning, and this is just like the cherry on top. She comes down. Emerus is in the kitchen with his mate, and he's got this like nice little blade. It's like lapis lazuli. Shout out to Vampire Diaries, and it's from Ilway. And she's like, I don't care. I don't care. And they're like, Alintia. And she's like, I don't care. And all she can think about is Nehemia lied to her and she's dead and she's gone. And she just like gets out of there. So Rowan comes to the kitchen and Emerus just says like, what are you doing to her? And he's like, what? And he's like, what are you doing to her to make her so empty? And Rowan's like, it's none of your concern. And Emerus is like, she desperately needs someone. And Emerus says, I was friends with Evelyn Ash River. I know exactly who she is. I recognized her as soon as she came. And he says, she has no help. No one. He's like, help her. And so Aelin is like walking and crying. And she hears her mom. And she says, why do you cry, Fireheart? And she says, because I am lost and I do not know the way. And Rowan shows up and he says, do you want to talk? And she says no. And he says, good. I think I figured you out. So he takes her to this frozen lake inside this cave, and Luca's in chains, and he's like, hi. And he goes, and I'm like, oh, okay. So that's the solution to my misery. And she's like, I'm sorry. He says, go get him. So Rowan froze this lake with his power. So not only can he suck the air out of your lungs, he can freeze water. I'm not really sure how that relates to air, but whatever. So whatever. So he's like, oh, she's like, okay, well, he's also like got chains on. So she's like, okay, give me the key. He's like, no, you figure that out too. So she needs to like get all the way out there. And she uses like the smallest like spool of her power of fire to like free him from the chains. So as she's doing that, then Rowan starts melting the ice because he's an asshole. But as he's doing that, she looks down and there's this giant red eye. And these giant white teeth. And as they were coming into this cave, she realized that there was no skeleton. So she was like, on the way in, she was like, oh, like good. Like there's no dead bodies or whatever. No, there's no skeletons because there's a monster and it's eating the people.
Yep.
So this thing in the lake is missing an eyeball. It's not a serpent. It's not a fish. I don't know what it is. So they start running for their lives and Rowan's trying to freeze the ice. And so Luca is like, they're getting off and they're like, fighting or whatever, and he throws her this sword that has like a ruby in it, and then like this gold ring like falls out of nowhere. So she grabs the ring and like she's using the sword, and this thing is like crawling out of like behind her, but then Rowan melts the ice so it like falls back in, and like literally as they're like running, they can hear this thing like like yelling and everything. And when they make it back, they like Luca go inside or whatever, and she just starts beating on Rowan, and she's like, I will kill you if you ever bring anybody else into this. And Rowan's like, I'll do whatever I want. And he's like, why does it matter? And she says, I am sick of this. And then she just like breaks down and she's like, I hate this. I hate her for leaving me. And so they go inside and Emerus just like loses it. And he's like, I'm sick of you guys coming in all bloody and bruised. And he tells her, like, you know, you're off kitchen duty for the next 2 days. But then, like, Luca looks at her and, like, taps her, like, his ear. Because, like, she never switched back into her, like, human form. But she's like, everybody here knows I'm a freaking fae. Like, this isn't, like, a secret or whatever. And then he's like, also, fix your filthy mouths, by the way. He's like, I've never heard such horrible, like, language or whatever. And so Aelin just, like, breaks down, like, and apologizes to them for, like, everything, for, like, her behavior. And then that night, like, Rowan helps her, like, do the dishes. And Emerus tells her, like, you know, he does know who she is and he knew her mom. And she asks Emerus about the lake. And he says, like, one time there was a traveler who tried to sneak into Maeve's lands. And basically he got beat up really bad. And on his way out, he came through here so we could heal him up. And he had basically camped at that cave and he saw something swimming. And basically the creature talked to him and told him that a Fey warrior had carved out its eye, and the warrior had worn a gold ring, and it had a ruby sword, and the beast spoke an old language, and like at the table, she notices Rowan wince from the burns she had gave him, like when they were trying to get away. And so that night she can't sleep because she feels bad. So she takes Rowan the salve that she has, and she like could actually see like his full body now. So his tattoo actually goes like from his face down to his neck and arm and his body and like all the way down to his hand. And like both of his wrists are burned. And he tells her, like, you know, you can heal yourself and you could heal me too, because she actually has a drop of like water from her dad's line, I think. But like she doesn't have as much of that as like the fire. Like it's literally like a drop of like water power. And oh no, she has a drop of water power from her mother's line, which is Mab's line. And that's kind of why she had wanted to be a healer, but like she doesn't have enough of that power to be a healer. And also they told her like queens aren't healers, so she couldn't do that. So he tells her like, you know, you should go to bed, but then he tells her wait. And so he tells her, when my mate died, it took me a long time to come back. And she says, how long? And he says 203 years, 203 years, 27 days, I think. And he basically says like my tattoo basically tells the like story of like my shame. And she says like others come to you to have their shame tattooed on them, basically. And he says Gabriel lost 3 of his men in an ambush. She asked basically if he was to blame for his mate's death, and he says yes. So basically like he had been kind of like obsessed with being like victorious and being a warrior, and wherever like Maeve wanted him to go, he went, and he made a lot of enemies. And he actually met his mate in Doranel, and Maeve disapproved. And so when they got together, like, I mean, when you have a mate, you don't have a choice. So whatever. But she disapproved, so he lost her favor. But when war like came, Maeve called and he went, but he left his mate alone in their mountain home. And while he was gone, their house was burned down, and she not only was killed, but she had been pregnant. But he did hunt down all the men that, I'm assuming they're men, all the people that killed her. And for years, he basically went mad. He was like in and out of his hawk form for like 10 years, until Maeve tracked him down and was like, enough, and basically told him that he was going to serve her. And honestly, he did it hoping that he would just end up dying serving for her. And so he took the blood oath, which is literally an oath they take and also like drink their blood. And he tells her like, honestly, I think sometimes I'm not all the way back still. And he says like, maybe we can find our way back together. And this is actually where we go to part 2. I don't know that part 1 had a name, but part 2 is called Heir of Fire. Mm-hmm. So I don't really know, but this is actually a 2-part book. I forgot to mention that. So this is part 2. Ren basically asks Adian, do you think there's a way for us to fix magic? Ren doesn't really have any magic, but he had 2 sisters who did, and they had been killed because they were away at the magic school, like when everything went down. And Ren asks Adian, like, are you planning on killing Kaal, like when he's no longer useful? And Adian says like, you know, I'll have to decide. And Ren says, well, what will your queen think of that? And he says like, well, if my queen's smart, she'll use me as the weapon I am. And he basically asks like, are you planning on being her husband? Which I know they're cousins, but like that's the world we live in. And basically what he's getting at, he's like, do you want to be king? And he says like, I wouldn't refuse her, but he's like, I just want to see her again. Like my goal is not to be king. Like I'm not doing this to become the king. Meanwhile, Kaal is still looking for a replacement, but he is starting to like hang with Adian for like appearances. And he recognizes like how lethal Adian and Aelin would be like together. Like that's a power couple. So they're at a bar and a soldier comes in and drinks with them, and he tells them he's like from very far away, a town called Knoll. And
far away.
Far away. And he says basically him and his troops were like suddenly pulled out because they were replaced by some unknown troops. But they're like, Knoll is basically a really miserable place with like these active volcanoes, and it's like dark all the time, and there's like this ash, and they have headaches all the time, and sometimes they have nosebleeds. And Chaos like, that sounds a lot like what Aelin said it felt like in the dungeons and in the tombs. And he's starting to have this theory about the clock tower, because the man also says, or one of them also mentions some other similar towers. And he's like, I need Dorian so that I can test out a theory. So over with Manon, she has been training for 2 weeks now. And from pretty much since that last time, they do not feed their wyverns anything from the camp anymore. They just have been hunting food for them. So she kind of like begs and convinces her grandmother to give them 2 days off for rest. But really, she is trying to figure out a way to enhance Abraxos's wings because he doesn't have good wings. So she wants to get spider silk. So the overseer is like, this is really dangerous. The spiders are like, murderous. And she's like, and he basically tells her like, you really need to make sure you think through your bargain with them. So she's going to see the Stygian spiders, which are as large as horses.
Yikes.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Literally nightmare fuel.
Absolutely not. I'm not doing that. So she basically like flies to them, and she meets with the spider, and it's a like female spider, and she's like, oh, like the witches don't come meet with us anymore, blah 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 blah, all this stuff. And she's like, basically like, I want 10 yards. And the spider says like, the spider's telling her like, I met a merchant once. He was a shapeshifter, before magic went away, and he sold me 20 years of his life, for selling the silk or whatever. And he told her about the waste, which is the land where the witches can't go anymore. And but the spider says, well, I don't want 20 years of your life because you're immortal and that doesn't mean anything to you, so I want something that matters. And she says, and I don't want to eat any of your dreams because your dreams are probably terrible. So she says, what if I took your beauty, your eyes and your hair and a woman's body? I might be able to win a prince. And Manon says, well, let me inspect the silk first. So Manon looks at it and she backs out to the edge of the cliff, which is like basically the spiders are kind of like in this cliff area. And she's looking at it and she's like, there's like this imperfection here. And that pisses the spider off. She's like, imperfection? This is perfect, da 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 da, all this stuff. And she says, nah, I'm not in the bargaining mood today. And the Abraxos literally just like hits them with his tail, and she hops on him and they just take off and steal the spider silk.
I'm like, power move, like.
Yeah, bold. I mean, there was one shot and she took it. So, hey, yeah. And they make it. Nothing happens. So, there's that. So, she reinforces his wings, and so now they need to attempt the crossing, which is like the big flight thing with the Abraxos. So, she goes to do it, and he refuses. He's not going to do it. So she's yelling at him, and Astron's like, he can't understand you. But she hasn't told Astron her theory, which is like, he absolutely can understand her. Like, they be having full conversations. He understands her. And so she tells the overseer, lock him up wherever he will be the most miserable, until he's willing to do it. So Iskra's there and says, oh, he just needs some encouragement. And she grabs a whip and slashes Abraxos in the face with it. So Manon tackles her, and she just starts beating the hell out of her. Rightfully so. Yep, but he's actually fine. But that night, Iskra also does get a second like beating from like her clan for attacking Abraxos as well, which good. And the next day, Petra, who is the blue blood heir, comes and said, my Keely has a appearance. So her wyvern's name is Keely. She says, my Keely wanted to offer Abraxos some fresh meat. And like Manon's like really like hesitant, and she's like, why would you like be offering this to your enemy? She's like, we're not enemies here or whatever, blah blah blah. And she's like, well, how would your wyvern tell you that? And she's like, yours doesn't talk to you, which is like interesting because like Manon feels like she's the only one that talks to hers, but obviously she's not. Like other ones have connections with their wyverns as well. So back with Aelin and Rowan, she is tattooing Rowan. So where he got burned during the whole lake thing, it kind of faded his tattoo. So he's teaching her how to tattoo him. And they're talking, and Rowan tells her he never had any siblings because his parents were really old when they had him, and he was in his second decade when they died. And Aelin never had any siblings because her mom almost died having her, but she did say she had a cousin that she was very close with. And she thinks about how she doesn't blame Aedion for working for the king. Like, she doesn't blame him at all. And he asks her, like, why do you want to fight so much for this friend that you have, but not for your own people? And she says, because I can fight for them as Celaena. And she says, after I do that, I can just be whoever I want. But she's like, if I fight as Aelin, then I have to take up the crown and my kingdom, and that's just like having another pair of shackles. And he's like, another pair? And she goes, oh, like, Arabin used that as training. But, like, he can tell that's not what she means. But he asks, like, why did you stay with him? And she just kind of, like, it's like, well, I mean, like, I didn't really have anything better to do, essentially. So over with Dorian and Sorsha, they've been, like, sneaking around for weeks now, and he just wants to, like, lavish her with gifts, but she won't let him. But he tries not to think about Aelin or Chaol. And Chaol apologizes to Dorian, but he's still really hateful towards him and, like, the thought of Aelin. Meanwhile, Aedion, Chaol, Ren, and Myrtal have, like, been meeting, and Myrtal tells them about this pirate lord named Rolf. And he's kind of taken over, like, the southern seas again, but he's, like, there's basically sending word back that there's, like, been some strange creature in the south with this black collar. And they ask Myrtal, like, about where the king's army has been headed now, because it was in the south, and Myrtal says to Winland, because someone convinced the king to send his champion there to kill the royal family. So since there's already, like, some stuff going on there, he was like, why not? So Chaol panics, saying she's not really going to kill them. And they're like, can we send, like, word to Rolf, get a message? And Myrtal's like, Rolf's not going to get involved with that. He's doing his own thing. He's a pirate lord, like, whatever. So Aedion asks Chaol, like, what side are you on? Like, why are you even doing any of this? And he's like, I'm not on any side. I just want to help my friend. And Aedion says, you haven't picked a side because you're afraid. And Aedion says, my cousin and your prince have both moved on, and you have done nothing. So the next morning, Chaol just goes to the king and tells him his plans, and he's packing up to go home. He's like, I'm done with this. So Aelin still cannot get to the bottom of her magic. Like, she's starting to, like, hate Maeve more and more the more, like, Rowan tells her about all of his, like, horrible missions that he's been on. But it's already, like, Beltane, which is kind of like a spring holiday, which is basically, like, this world's Colin Mai kind of thing. Which means, like, she's been there for a few months, and she's really still not ready to see Maeve. But she's been noticing, like, females looking at Rowan lately, and it pisses her off. So, like, at this event or whatever, the celebration, Rowan makes her just, like, stand at the bonfires and control them. And all she can think about is how she wants to, like, eat and dance and enjoy. And Rowan realizes, like, you can use the music to, like, focus yourself, because, like, the last time when she was on the lake, she was, like, humming to herself to steady herself. So she starts losing control, and he's like, all right, pay attention, like, focus, but she doesn't. So he grabs her, and he's like, hey, like, all right, let it go, like, you've done enough. But she's on fire. She's burning. And she, like, just, like, slowly, like, looks at him and then looks back at the fire. And he's like, that is enough. And she's, like, just thinking, like, no, it's not. Like, I'm good or whatever. And then she starts to feel pain. And now she can't let go of the fire. And he says, like, you're going to burn out. And she just collapses and she can't breathe. And she's, like, burning from the inside out. And he just starts saying, I'm so sorry. Because he just basically told her, like, just keep going a little longer. And he kind of pushed her to a burnout. So he picks her up and she's literally, like, burning. So she's burning him. But he runs her to a tub. Because there was, like, no water wielders where they were, and all she can think is, like, he smells of pine and snow. And they get her in the water, and there's, like, some other people there, and they tell him to freeze it, so he does, but she immediately, like, boils that water, so they move her to another one, and they, like, just keep doing this until she, like, boils it less and less, and they have to, like, take her clothes off, and he tells her, like, you have to learn to recognize when you're, like, burning out, but he tells her, like, you can't touch your magic for a while until you recover. So he, like, steps out of the room for a moment, and she just kind of, like, leans forward, and when he steps back, she can hear him, like, intake a breath, and she knows, like, he saw her back, and she tells him basically what happened, and he realizes she was a slave. So he storms out of there and immediately, like, bursts into hawk form, and he feels like Maeve lied to him. Like, he's like, he can't believe that he threatened to to whip this girl, and she had been a slave. And like Maeve did not prepare him or tell him anything about her. And he almost flies to Maeve demanding answers, but he knows like she's not going to tell him anything and could possibly make him stay there. So he, changes course. And he also realizes that she's been keeping this from him, so that Aelin really doesn't trust him and probably just assumes the worst about him. So when Aelin wakes up, she realizes she's in his room, and even though like he's far away, like they're kind of in the same bed, and he tells her from now on she'll be staying with him in his room, and like he's like, I'll get you a cot in this room or whatever. But his room is like actually warm and like not damp and dank and disgusting like her room. And he apologizes, and she's like, I do not want your pity. And she's like, I figured that you didn't know, but I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to mock me, but I absolutely do not want your pity. So like the next day, he's like basically is like pampering her, like bringing her food. And she asks like, does burning out cause like all the males to go crazy like this or whatever? And he's like, you're a danger basically when you don't have your powers. Like we got to get you healed up. And she says like, so that's it. Like when you burn out, there's nothing else. And he says, well, there's Karanam. And she loves the way he sounds when he talks in the old language. And basically, Karanam is when you're compatible with somebody, like not necessarily a mate, but you can be compatible with someone and you can send them your power to boost their own. And she says, well, how do you know when you're compatible? And he's like, I don't know. It's just like really rare. And he's like, it's dangerous because the other person could take too much power or you could both burn out. And she says, this conversation is depressing. She says, tell me which one of your cadre is the handsomest and which one would favor me. And she says, your kitty cat friend looks decent enough. And he says, I don't know that my kitty cat friend would know what to do with you or any of them. And it would probably end in bloodshed.
When she said kitty cat friend, I was like, I'm dying.
Like kitty cat friend. And he tells her, like, a really good healer could probably heal your scars. And she says, at the slave camp, there were these like really dark cells that they would put you in that basically made you lose your mind. And the only thing that would help me was reminding myself of my name. And she says, I want to keep my scars as a reminder of what I went through. And that one day I will go back and I will free all of the slaves there. And she tells him like, there's this rage that lives inside of me. And she says, like, she basically forces it down because if it ever comes to the surface, like, she won't be able to contain herself and she'll literally kill everyone. And she says, that's how I'm able to stand in front of the king of Otterland. And that's how I'm able to befriend the prince, is like forcing myself to keep that anger down. And she says, if I become Aelin, that means I release the monster. And he says, no, I think you collect scars because you think that you deserve them because I do the same thing. And he says, at least if you're going to hell, then we'll be there together. And she says, I feel bad for the dark god already. We go over to Manon, and her grandmother literally slashes her face and asks her, like, why are you and your beast not flying the crossing? And she's like, you're an embarrassment. And she says, you will do it tomorrow. So her and Abraxos prepare for the crossing, and literally everyone's watching. So they go off, and they plummet. But his wings work, and they are soaring across the crossing. And we go back to Aelin. So Rowan is watching her because Aelin has been sneaking out in the mornings to work on her powers. And he's like amazed. Like she is dedicated and she is doing amazing. She like recovered and she's just doing amazing. But another body has been reported. So her and Rowan are going to investigate the body. And Aelin feels like sometimes their powers are kind of like playing together. It's really weird. And her and Rowan still like share a bed, but like not in a romantic way at all. And sometimes she even still like dreams about Chaol. And so they go to see another body, and this is a demi-fae, and she knows that this thing is targeting them. And this time she sees this black pool that she saw in one of the catacombs, and she tells him that this creature is the one from the catacombs, and like it's from the king. Mm-hmm. And Rowan says, we're going to hunt it. So they like get prepared to do all that, and she's like admiring his body because he's like took his shirt off to clean his weapons or whatever. So she's like, while there's like just like kind of waiting biding time or whatever, she asked him like, you said that mates would never hurt, like, she said like, you would never harm your mate. And he's like, yeah, why? And she's basically like, well, she's basically realizing like Chaol wasn't her mate because she did harm him or whatever. And Rowan says like, well, I mean, like, you weren't in your Fae form for 10 years. Like, maybe that has something to do with it. Wrong. No. We don't like Chaol. Anyways, the next day they like go to this beach and they put together that this must be where these things are coming from. So it looks like ships have been coming from Otterland, and then these things have been coming up the rivers because all the bodies have been found next to rivers. So Rowan's like, we have to get out of here before something finds us. And so they make a plan to come back when it's dark. So they come back, and it's not only dark, but it's raining, and they find that there's some soldiers in a cave, and they smell awful. So Rowan sneaks in his hawk form, and there are 200 soldiers and 3 of those creatures. And he says the creatures look like men, but there is something inside of them. And she tells him to warn Winland, and he says, I think they're headed to the fortress because of the Demi-Fae. And he's like, Demi-Fae could either be a threat or they could be used for bodies for those creatures and be turned into powerful weapons. And she wants to kill them, but Rowan says we can't. They have iron and word marks. And he tells her, like, they're being led by Norak, and they're also experimenting on a Demi-Fae right now. And he's like, I tried to, like, help her the best I can by, like, cutting off her ear or whatever, but there's nothing more I can do for her. So they go to leave, but then they smell one of the creatures. So Rowan tells her to go one way and he'll go the other, and, like, not to use her magic, but as it approaches her, she can tell, like, it's getting close, and, like, her nose starts bleeding, and then all of a sudden the creature's gone. And so she turns, like, thinking it went to go chase after Rowan, and all of a sudden it's, like, right behind her, and it's like everything stops, and it's wearing a collar. But Rowan swoops in, and he just, like, grabs her because he knows, like, they cannot fight this thing. They have to run. So they just start running 4 miles, and this thing will not stop following them. So she's like, I have an idea. So she has Rowan lead this monster, like, on a chase, but she lures out some of the skinwalkers. And she and Rowan, like, run, and they climb up in the tree, and those things fight for, like, an hour. And they believe that the skinwalkers win it out. So they get back to the fortress, and they basically tell them everything. And they're like, you can leave if you want, but, like, this is what's getting ready to happen. So Rowan was like, he's planning out everything for the defenses, but she's asking, like, why don't you call the rest of, like, your cadre, like, your friend group or whatever? But he's like, you know why. And it's because Maeve will not approve. And she knows, like, she says, Maeve doesn't deserve you. And she wishes deep down that he could come home with her when she leaves, but there's no way that he could break his oath. And Rowan tells her, that he has to tell her some bad news. So in the last book, we got a sneak peek of this. After Nehemia's death, it flashes to a girl in a slave camp, and they hear about Nehemia's death. So this is what Rowan's telling her. So after Nehemia's death reached the slave camp, there was an uprising. And because of that uprising, they killed all of the slaves in the Ilway camp. And because of that, they also killed all of the slaves in the camp that Aelin had been in as well, and Andavir. So she's, like, distraught because she's like, I've never even got to go back and free those people. Like, I'm worthless all over again. So we switch over to Chaol, and he hasn't really heard from, like, his friends or from, like, his rebel friends in weeks. And, like, they're all kind of, like, in the king's room or whatever, and he announces, like, well, it's a good day. We killed all the slaves. And everyone's like, what? And Adian goes, oh, great. Thank you, sir. And, like, Dorian literally, like, rushes to Sorsha, and he's like, you have to leave. And she's like, no, like, I'm not going to go anywhere. And he's like, keep trying to tell her to go. And she's like, okay, well, then come with me. And he's like, no, like, I can't leave because, like, if my brother becomes king, like, it'll be even worse. And now he's starting to understand why Chaol sent Aelin away. Meanwhile, Chaol finds Adian in the tombs, and Adian says, I have done so many terrible things, but nothing has made me feel worse than thanking that man for killing my people today. After that day, there's a theater show, and the theater is literally packed, and every musician comes out wearing, like, mourning black, and they don't play the regular music. They start with the Song of Ilway, and then a song from Terrasen and some of the other, like, conquered places. And then they end it with the Song of Otterland. And then the next day, the theater is shut down, and no one ever sees any of the musicians again. They took a stance.
Yep.
So, back with Rowan and Aelin, Rowan tells her, like, basically there are no reinforcements coming. And she's like, what a surprise. And he tells her, you don't have to stay. He says, you have my blessing. You can go to Maeve now. And she's like, do not insult me. He says, or she says, Nehemia would have stayed, my parents would have stayed. And he says, they had the comfort of knowing that their bloodline did not die with them. But she tells him no. So he gives her like the sword back from the lake and he calls her Fireheart. And what actually, the reason that the reinforcements aren't coming though is because Ireland has also launched an attack like at their northern border. So there literally is no one to send anyways. So not even Emrys leaves the fortress. And Rowan does tell her that he did end up calling his friends for help. So they'll see if they actually show up. And she tells him like, she doesn't care how much he fights it. She claims him as her friend. And so they go to bed and she's quickly woken up and he says, I think we've been betrayed. It looks like someone told them where every one of our warning bell is. You have to get up and be ready right now. So they line up. They start making a barrier. And Rowan tells them to use as little magic as possible and take them down by any means necessary. And she had thought that the Skinwalker had killed the one that was chasing them, but he shows up right along with the other one. So it's the three creatures and all the soldiers. And Norak comes out and he sends a strike directly at the magic barrier. And he just keeps hitting it, trying to take it down. So she wants to go outside of the walls, which is outside the barrier, to use her fire, but obviously Rowan's absolutely not. But she tells Rowan go inside because the soldiers are also coming through the hidden tunnels, so they know someone's betrayed them, which ends up being Luca's friend. So she and Rowan argue back and forth, and he's hold the line, do not try to kill them. And she says okay, knowing it's a lie. And she steps outside the barrier and she immediately goes for them. And she grabs a sword and her fire merges with it, and one of them creatures whispers Goldrin. And she thinks back to what Cain had said in the first book and thinks about how Brannon, which is King Brannon, had to fight these demons, and so had Celaena, and she realizes what these things are. They are known as the Vogue. And she says, Brannon beat you guys. And they said, we were not beaten, just pushed back until someone else invited us in. And she has the upper hand for a small second, but then they start beating on her. But then all of a sudden she sees the rest of Rowan's friends coming. So there's a really tall man, a massive bird, and then a mountain cat and two wolves, a black one and a white one. And she sees them come in and they run right past her. She's go inside, Rowan's in there, but she's just getting so tired and she's starting to burn out, and the creature grabs her and just pulls her in. So all she can see is the blood of her parents and Nehemia, and then she's in Andover and Sam and Nehemia are whipping her. And she knows she hadn't gone past this barrier with the will to live. She's doing the same thing she did in Andover when she kind of snapped and was killing the overseers. But now she's thinking back to the night when she had first met the King of Ireland and Dorian. They had come to her home the night before her parents died, or a couple nights before her parents died. And she had hated the king then because he mistreated Dorian. He pretty much just ignored him. And she had told Dorian that he ate like a fine lady. And she told him he could be her friend. And he said, I already have a friend. He is to be the Lord of Aniel. And she had reached for her water to kind of cool off because she was starting to feel her power. But then she got this headache and it would not go away like normal. And something felt like it was trying to get inside of her head. And she started burning up and smoking. And her mother literally had to drown her out with her power. And the king just smiled at her. And now as an adult, she knows that the king had used his power on her that night. And she can hear the soldiers talking about her as she's in and out of these flashbacks. And her mother had thought this attack had been from Maeve. So her mother had given her the amulet of Orinth, which was a white stag of Terrasen, and basically told her to wear it for guidance and safety. And she said, wear it and know that it is the strength of this that matters. No matter where you go, this will lead you home. Unfortunately, she had lost it the next night. And there had been a strange smell that night and a storm. And Lady Marian of Pranth had found her the next morning in the bed with her parents, covered in their blood, and basically had cleaned her up and had sent for Adian and Dorian and all these, or not Dorian, Adian and all these people, and they had stayed in the house waiting for somebody to come help. And they also had learned that the king had been killed as well, and they'd just been holding each other, and then they had heard somebody approaching outside on a horse. So they hid under the table, and she told Aelin to run for the river and hide at the farm until she saw someone she recognized, and not to come out even if someone claimed that they were helping her unless she recognized them. And the last thing she told her was to tell my Elide I love her very much. And so she ran, and as she looked back, she saw Lady Marian defending her, and then the man killed her and chased her on his horse. And she had run and like got stuck in the tree roots, but all the little folk who had always been around had helped her get loose. And she had made it to the bridge, and as she was crossing it, the man had cut it, and she plummeted into the river. And the next thing she knew, she woke in Arobyn's keep. And she just felt like all the sacrifices for her life had just been a waste. And so then it's like she's seeing another Aelin, and it's like reaching for her to get up. And then she sees Sam and Nehemia and her father and her uncle and Lady Marian and her mom. But then they start saying that she's worthless and horrible and a waste. But on the, like, in the real time, it seems like because they've collected Aelin, that now the creatures aren't focusing so much on, like, attacking the keep anymore. But the barrier is down now. So while this is all going on, Gavriel is trying to tell Rowan to come back inside because he's watching them with Aelin. And he's like, no, she's alive. Like, I can sense it. And they're like, dude, she's dead. Like, they're sucking, they can see them sucking the life out of her. And Lorcan is literally holding him back. And all of a sudden there's like this giant rumble of power, and they're like, that's impossible. She literally burnt out. But then all of a sudden Aelin is standing, and this strange mark is on her brow, and she starts like breathing out fire and just incinerates these things. And they're like, Heir of Fire. And Rowan can tell that she's about to burn out again, and so he knows what to do, and he takes out his dagger and slices his palm. And she thinks she knew it would work, that they were Caranam, and she says, to whatever end, and he says, I claim you too, Aelin Galathynius. And they like touch palms, and she burns the rest of them, and the only thing that is left is their collars, just like left on the ground. So we go back to Chaol, and he finds Dorian and Sorsha together. And Dorian like is like, don't worry. He puts his arm around her, like, it's cool. And Dorian agrees. Like, he's like, you know, I need you. I want to try out this thing, this theory. So he basically has this theory because basically there was 3 towers, and it's kind of like a triangle, and all the magic disappeared in between the triangle that the 3 towers made. So he basically sets up these bowls. Where's it? So Chaol sets up like these crystals, and he wants Dorian to like pull power from them and then like freeze this bowl of water. Because he thinks that the whole like magic being gone is actually just a spell. So Dorian starts doing it, and it's really hard, but then it works. And Chaol says, have I been saying Cole this whole time? No. I feel like I was saying Cole. I'm reading it because that's what it says, but I know what I meant. And Chaol says, this is how your dad did it. He says the whole magic barrier is just a spell. And Dorian asks him, like, you know, are you working with the rebels now? And he says, I'm doing this for you. And Dorian asks him, like, are you going to knock down the tower? And Chaol knows, like, you know, knocking down the tower is just going to literally be an act of war. And he says, I don't know what to do. And Dorian tells him, like, you know, I don't know either, but, like, I know I don't want things to go back to the way they were before. And Chaol just thinks, like, how Dorian no longer looks like a prince, and he's starting to look like a king. So it takes Aelin days to recover, but she does. And the soldiers that, like, weren't killed in the battle ended up taking, like, a poison that they all had and killed themselves rather than being, like, interrogated. But all of Rowan's friends are, like, either already left or, like, on their way out. And Gavriel's the last one. And he's literally the only one that's, like, even, like, kind of nice. And Rowan's like, did any of them even stop to try to help you? And she's like, why does it matter? Because she knows he's gonna be pissed. And she's like, no. So, you know, he's pissed. Gavriel basically is kind of, like, giving the warning, like, you know, we have to go back and tell Maeve because Maeve's gonna be pissed. So, you know, Rowan's like, it's fine, whatever. And so Aelin's thinking, like, she wished she had something that she could give Rowan to protect him, and then she stops. She's thinking about how Terrasen was, like, so protected, and she knows where the final, or where at least one word key is. And she's like, it had been around my neck when I fell into the river that night. It had protected her because she had seen it glowing when she fell in, and it's lost. But then she goes, it can't be lost because it had been protecting me, and she knows who has it. Arabin. He probably doesn't know what it is, but he has it. Rowan realizes that she knows something, but she says, I can't tell you while you're bound to her. And he says, well, I'm bound to her for forever. And she says, I know. And she says, well, since I can't tell you that, I'm going to tell you something else that I've never told anyone else. She says, once upon a time, in a land long since burnt to ash, there lived a young princess who loved her kingdom very much. And she tells him the story of how her parents died and the whole thing we just recounted. And she summons one little water droplet, and he like laughs at her. And like she looks like in the mirror, and she's like fully recovered now, and like she's looking at how like not only has she recovered, but she like actually looks like a woman now. And her and Rowan head out, and she's like saying her goodbyes to everyone. And back over in Ireland, Murtaugh rushes in to Chaol and Adian and Ren, and he says she's alive. Aelin, there's reports that she was fighting in Winland, and literally like people are cheering in the streets. Meanwhile, Dorian's with his dad, and he is pissed, and Dorian's just like, he's loving it. So Rowan and Aelin arrive in Doranel to see Maeve, and right now it's just those twin wolves with Maeve. And Rowan immediately kneels, and she never even lets him stand up because she is trash. And Maeve is like, show me what you got. And Aelin says, I want to know how to destroy the keys. Maeve says, you can't. You can only return them to their home, and no one knows how. And she says, well, what do they look like and feel like? And Maeve says, black and slithering, like nothing on this earth, like madness and joy and fear. And she asks, she's like, okay, like you're telling me nothing. She's like, okay, well, what about the Vogue princes? And she says, well, the princes have no bodies of their own. There's lots of different types. And Maeve goes, how do you think Brandon won his kingdom? He was born to nobody, but he had firepower that could push them back. And Aelin goes, Brandon wasn't royal? And Maeve says, didn't anyone ever tell you what that mark on your brow means? And she says, I was told it was sacred. And Maeve said, it's the bastard's mark. It means nameless. And Aelin says, so why does it glow when I like fight with them? And Maeve says, I don't know, maybe it recognizes them. But Aelin's not buying it. And Maeve says, they're hard to kill, but not invincible. And she says, without all three keys, the king can only open other worlds for short periods of time to let one or two through. But with all three keys, he'll be unstoppable. He won't need to even have living hosts for them. So he could literally have an undead army.
Reminds me of the mask in Akatar.
Oh, yeah. Creepy. So Aelin's like starting to panic, and then she feels like this calm come over her. And so Maeve says, the king has one, maybe two keys, but the third key, I think you have some idea where it is, don't you? And Aelin's like looking around, and she's like, why is this lady's castle all stone? It's not a plant, a tree, a nothing. And Aelin says, no. And Maeve tells Rowan to stand and tell her the truth. And he says, she figured out that the king has at least one key, and then a riddle telling her where the third key is, but refused to tell me. So Maeve tells Lorcan and Gavriel to come in, and tells Lorcan to whip Rowan until Aelin answers her. So Rowan just takes it, and everybody's just standing there while this is going on like it's a regular Tuesday. So Aelin starts summoning her power, and she says, you want to see a magic trick? She tells Maeve, I will burn your city down. And Maeve says, well, it's stone. And Aelin says, your people aren't. She says, this is what you wanted to see. And this is why you abandoned your land and moved to this castle of stone. And why you wanted my mother to bring me to you to see what type of power you had to fear. And she blows out every light in the city. And she goes over to Rowan, and like, they just release him like out of fear of her. And she throws open her mind to Maeve and shows her a vision that Norat gave her, which is not true. But it shows the people in Orinth like cheering her name, and like she has a court, and Adian's with her, and she has the amulet. And Maeve looks horrified, even though the vision was a lie, but she doesn't know that. And she says, I suggest you think carefully before whatever you do to Rowan. And Maeve says, Rowan belongs to me. And Aelin pulls out that gold ring she had gotten that day at the lake. And she says, I think you've been looking for this. And Maeve says, that does not belong to you. And it's the family ring that Athril, I think that's how you say it, would have given to you. And Athril was Maeve's lover. And Aelin says, I'll trade you your beloved ring. I cannot talk. Aelin says, I'll trade you your beloved's ring for Rowan's blood oath. And Maeve agrees. So she frees him with no contest. And Rowan immediately swears the oath to Aelin. Aelin's like, no, don't do that. And he's like, yes, I'm doing that. And so she's like, cuts her wrist and he drinks 3 times from her wrist. And Maeve is like, everybody get out of here. So they all leave. That's it. So they like leave and find a place to stay. And the next day she begs Rowan to tattoo her back scars. Also, these tattoos are salted. Tattoos hurt enough. Like, I don't need to add salt.
More torture.
Like, they already hurt. Also, I can't imagine getting like a manual tattoo.
No.
Also adding salt on top of them. Like, God, like, what kind of medieval torture device is this? That's literally what that is. Yeah. Like, oh my gosh. But she gets a tattoo that tells the story of her parents and Marion's death. And we switch back over to the witches. So they're going to have war games, which is in a canyon, and they have to capture the enemy's egg and also protect their eggs. And they're each allowed to carry 2 weapons. So they're doing their whole thing and they're fighting. And Iskra's wyvern attacks Petra's Keely. And Keely is dying. So because of like Petra being so nice and because of the connection that Manon sees Petra have with Keely, Manon literally like jumps off of Abraxos and saves Petra because Keely is literally like plummeting to her death in this canyon. So she unhooks her and jumps back on Abraxos, and Keely literally like plummets to her death and dies. And of course, her grandmother is pissed that she would be so heroic and save another witch that's not a part of her coven.
So before we go any further, I just realized, like, I was like, yeah, war games, yeah, like, but, like, isn't that the exact
same thing? They capture the flag.
Yeah, and then protecting your own.
Yeah, it's literally the exact same.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. that was literally like copy and paste. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. I see you, Rebecca. I see you. Okay, so after this, though, Manon is the winner of War Games. So she goes to, like, all the coven leaders, and they're like, we want to give you a gift, because her grandmother is evil. And she's like, what about a new cloak? And they pull out a Kraken witch. And the witch says, Manon Blackbeak. And she says, we call you the White Demon. And says, like, basically, like, you're the top of our list of, like, witches they would like to kill. And she says, we pity you for what you do to your children. And, like, this witch is, like, all beat up. Like, they've already, like, beat this witch up and broke her fingers and done all kind of terrible stuff to her. And she's like, you teach your children to be terrible and hate, but they're not born that way. And they're like, kill her, do all this stuff. And, like, Manon just, like, slices her throat. And Manon thinks, like, it's so weird because she's starting to have all these feelings. And witches don't feel. They don't, like, even her and Astrid, who are, like, essentially best friends, but they're not. They're not. That's her second. Like, they're, even, like, though they're blood, like, they don't have hearts. Like, her grandmother didn't say at one point, like, you don't have a heart. Witches aren't born with hearts. Like, they have no warm and fuzzies at all. So, we go back to Adian, and he asks Kaal, like, because Kaal's planning on leaving. He's like, what would you like me to tell Aelin when I see her? And he's basically like, just tell her that I'm fine, basically. And Sorsha is, she's laying with Dorian and he's sleeping. And Kaal goes to see the king because he's been summoned. And he goes in and he finds him with Adian and a bunch of weird guards. And the king's just grinning. And then Dorian is running to get Sorsha, and he's like, we have to get out of here. But that old Nino healer's in there, and she says, I don't think so. You've been summoned, and they're taken to the king. So now Dorian, Adian, Chaol, and Sorsha are all summoned to the king. And the king says, my spies have been finding my general sneaking around with the king, whatever, the head of the guard, whatever they call Chaol. And my son is mixing with the help, basically, again. And Dorian's like, I hate this court. It's stupid, or whatever. And Sorsha is forced to kneel, and they put a sword at her neck. And, like, these guards are all different. No one's ever seen them. And they all have these, like, blackish eyes. And Dorian is like, let her go. I'll tell you everything. So the king says, okay, why are the general and Chaol meeting? And Dorian's like, I don't know. I have no idea. And the king says, who is the spy in my castle? And Adian just like takes off his ring and says, it's me. And he says, my queen is coming and she will spite you all to hell. And the king is like, this is good because Aelin will come and save you, and has Adian like dragged off to the dungeons. And Dorian is like, let her go. And the king says, she is the true traitor to this castle. She's been sending letters to the rebels. And Sorsha says, you destroyed everything I had and deserve everything that's coming to you. And Dorian begs and like, please, like, take me, do whatever to me, exile her. And the king says, no. And they chop off her head. And Chaol pulls out his sword. And the king's like, he's like, put your sword away. He's like, there's no reason for you to leave disgraced. And Chaol says, I won't serve you. There's a queen. And the king says, okay, kill him too. And Dorian just like releases his power, freezing the guards' weapons. And the king says, don't touch him, and looks at Dorian and says, I knew you had it in you. And Dorian tells Chaol to go. And Dorian knew that this has been a trap for him to expose his magic. And his father grabs him and he says, do it. And the king says, oh no, it won't be death. And he pulls out a keyless black collar and puts it on, and darkness just sweeps in.
I was like, no.
And Chaol runs to Aelin's room and grabs Fleetfoot, never leaving Fleetfoot behind.
Thank goodness.
And he goes to the tombs and grabs Damaris, and he goes out like the exit way that way, and he goes to Aelin's apartment to tell like Ren and Myrtle what happened. And it was Ren who Sorsha was writing letters to. And we go back to Manon, and Manon's getting orders from her grandmother, and her orders are for her and the 13 to go to Morath, which is where Duke Perrington has been. And that is also where he took Caltaine and what was the cousin's name? I can't remember the cousin's name, but whatever the cousin's name, he went there too. So back with Aelin, her and Rowan have been bonded for 2 minutes, and they're already arguing because her plan is to come back to Adarlan. She's like, I have to come back. I have to make sure Chaol's okay. I don't know why. And she wants Rowan to go north, and because she's like, you'll be stuck in like hawk form, like you're gonna have to eat rats, like you're not gonna want to do that, like whatever. She's like, I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna gather my court, and then I will send for you or whatever. And it just ends with, she was Aelin Ashriver Galathinius, and she would not be afraid. The end. Woo, woo, woo.
So, before we get into all of this, because I'm trying to remember, I'm gonna have you send me, like character art.
Yes.
Character art, because I had tried to look like it up, but I don't know if they were spoilers or if it was like fan, like
who was it?
Whatever. Well, just like in general. So I was like, I saw something that could have potentially been suspicious. So I was like, okay, I'm just turning it off. So I'll need some fan art of them, or just character art or whatever. But
okay,
I really enjoyed it. My favorite one so far.
Yes.
rated it close enough to 5 stars that it'd be
Yeah.
5 stars.
Yeah.
So
4.5, 4.75, 5.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I theories, thoughts. Where do we go from here? There's so much going on.
Oh, I don't know, but I'm stressing already.
What do you? Okay, so Rowan's had a mate.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what's up?
I don't know. I like Rowan though.
Yeah,
I really like Rowan.
What do you think that's gonna be?
I want her to be completely over Kale.
I know he's
Like,
I don't like him.
forget him, please. I don't know, but I like Rowan.
Dorian's got a collar.
I'm so sad.
I know. And now our next book's not even like gonna be anything to update you about this because we're reading. It's like fundamental, but like.
Is it like kind of like prequel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all Aelin information, but like, and it's things she's mentioned. Yeah, Rowan has a collar. Manon's going to. We still have new characters to meet. What else? Maeve. Is this the last of Maeve? What do you think? I don't like Maeve.
No.
She's like Amarantha.
Yeah. I don't know. Very self-serving for sure. And cold and cruel.
Yeah.
Definitely not a fan. Obviously I hate the king.
Yeah, he sucks.
With a fiery passion. I don't know. I'm really excited to see what
the next book will be good for you. I mean, they are going to, but like the emotional roller coaster that you will go through is interesting.
Will I cry?
You may. Oh, the next one will probably eat you up too, even though it's a prequel.
I am good with the emotional stuff. Gimme.
Okay.
Gimme.
Okay. Do we have reviews?
We sure do.
I'm sure there's like a million. I'm sure there's a million reviews.
So there is, Jesus, 1,091,995
I was joking.
ratings.
Oh my gosh.
And a little over 82,000 reviews. So we have plenty. Just gotta choose one that's not like 500 paragraphs. So let's start with the 1 star.
Surprising this episode's not that long. We're only at 2.5 hours. I was like, this is gonna be a 4-hour episode. Whew, thank God.
So 1 star, reasons why I didn't like this book.
How?
It was dull as dirt. It was way too long. I was so tired of the angst, no matter how justified it was. I love angst. Give me all the angst. Rowan is overrated. There, I said it. Hey.
A lot of people don't like Rowan.
Boo you.
He is rough. He's rough.
I don't know. I just like a grump. I fell asleep listening to the audiobook over 15 times, 7 alone for the last 10%. The chapters with the witches felt so pointless. By the way, the king outlawed magic, but witches are okay. I feel like each book...
They don't have any powers.
I feel like each book follows the same plot. Celaena trains, Celaena fights with a cute guy, mysterious monsters killing people, Celaena fights to kill monsters. The end. I can't. Okay.
Well.
You do you, boo.
Yeah, that's all I can say about that. I mean...
Jesus. That review took up a whole freaking page. 5 stars. Sarah J. Maas is a capital G god. I loved the way this book was structured with all of the main characters on their own separate journeys. I loved each new character that was introduced. Celaena's character development in this book, there are no words for it. I would fall on my sword for Dorian. I know in my bones that the series is only going up from here, and I'm buckled up in the passenger seat, holding on for dear life, praying to the sun goddess and any additional gods who will listen.
Yes.
I agree.
Yes.
So does Evie.
Oh, most importantly, Evie. Yeah, so, yeah, it just gets good from here. I mean, there's, like, one book that I'm not excited to read because...
Because of reasons.
Because it focuses on KL. Like, of all the people, like, the group splits, and, like, we get new characters, but I'm just like, of all the people. And that's when I was talking about the tandem read, so, like, I tandem read it, but, like, that's, like, impossible for us to do, so I'm like...
Yeah, I'm not a fan of KL, and I think my biggest reasoning is I feel like he's very lukewarm, very kind of wishy-washy, and doesn't have his own.
Someone said that he's the Ethan of this book. I don't know. I feel like I like Ethan more than I like KL.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, I just feel like he doesn't have his own, like. His own.
I just don't and this is in real life, people like this, like, who are so, like, judgmental and, like.
And he doesn't think for himself.
Yeah, like, you don't have, like, your own brain, like, at all. Like, that is just so, like, you're an adult and you don't have your own brain. Like, and that's just what it is. Like, you just blindly follow.
Exactly.
Your, like, king, and you don't have a brain of your own. And that's just what it is. And
You don't have original thoughts, and you can't, stand up for yourself because you don't.
And really? you're literally, like, and it's like Dorian said, like, in the first book or whatever, like, you can't choose, like, what parts of her to love, like, or in the last book, whatever, like, you can't, like, you're like, oh, I like Aelin. I don't like when she does assassin stuff. Well, she is an assassin. Like, and she was when you met her. Like,
right.
Yeah, like, I don't like people like that. Like, you don't have to have anything involved with me, but you can't get involved with me and be like, oh, but I don't like these parts.
Right.
Like, if you just, and, like, even, like, people call us cards the whole time. Like, the whole, like, well, I'm not, like, on a side. I'm just doing this for my friend. Like, no, well, you're doing rebel stuff.
Right. And if you're not on a side, like...
You have to be on a side.
Right.
There is no fence to straddle.
I'm doing this for my friend, but I'm not necessarily on his side.
And then, like, well, whatever side he would choose. What? So if he chose the wrong side, you would just do that. If he chose to just, like, kill everybody just because...
Right.
You would just do that because he's your friend. Like, what do you mean? Like, that's wrong and stupid. Like, yeah, I'm like, just shut up, please. Like, just don't speak anymore. Yeah, like, irritates me, like, so bad. And, like, also, like, his dad is a mean person, but, like, also, like, nothing has ever happened to you in your life. Mm-hmm. Like, just please shut up. Like, nothing, you've never had a bad day. Like, not seriously. Like, your dad does suck, that is true, but, like, you've never really had, like, hard life, so, like, please.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like him. And he has a character arc, and, like, but I can tell you, like, I still don't ever like him. All right, well, our next book is Here Lies a Vengeful Bitch by Cody Crowley. Yes. So that is our next one. It'll be shorter. Yes.
It is a really quick read.
Quick, fun read. So excited to do that one. But yeah, so that is all we have. A lengthy little episode, not as long as I was anticipating, so that is good. But as always, comment, rate, review, share. We appreciate it. And
be our friends.
Be our friends, yes. And that's all we got. Bye.
Bye.